All right, this is the third episode of Gigahand Dreams podcast. A gigahand is a unit of worldwide creative power. I named it Gigahand because I would love to live in a world where 8 billion pairs of hands, so 16 billion hands, all work together to recreate reality constantly and instantly to a crescendo of new realities. Gigahand Dreams is funded in part by the National Science Foundation. My third ever guest is Andy Cavatorta. Andy has toured with Bjork as a musical roboticist. Do you want to know how reality works? Andy's kind of running a class on the laws of reality and design and where those two things intersect. Let's go.
I want to live in a world built by all of us. A gigahand is a measure of worldwide creativity. How can we reinvent learning? What would a world look like built by 8 billion pairs of hands? This is the Gigahand Dreams podcast.
Audio check.
Hello, hello.
Oh yeah, we sound good, but then background noise.
I think you sound fine. Also, this in a way is something about the city.
Yeah, it is.
Where you have control over so few things. And that's just part of the upside and downside of being in a city instead of out where you have land and space around you.
Totally. Yeah. And here we are in the city.
We're in the city and we're going to have traffic noise.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, a big truck will go by and the building like bumps. Boom,
right.
Boom, boom. And the train, about 120 feet down, goes by and you feel it up here, of course.
There's so many layers to a city. We're in Brooklyn.
We're in Brooklyn.
We're at your studio. We're on a table that when I got here did not have any place to attach mics. So Andy clamped and modified the table.
Well, everything here is for getting work done. So everything is disposable in the service of whatever today's objective is.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that feeling. I knew if I forgot something, you would go from somewhere from duct tape to whatever was needed.
To modifying the software. Yes. Well, only from a history of far too many like 3 a.m. moments. And you and I went to the Media Lab together. So you know this.
Yeah.
Where there's only one path forward and it's something no rational person would ever choose to do. But that's the only path. So that's what you do. It's 3 a.m. and you have to demonstrate this to important people in 5 hours. There's 4 days of work to do, but you're going to make it work anyway.
Right. And so what you're referring to is there's demo days at Media Lab where you have to demonstrate your latest project and it has to be something brand new. Mm-hmm. And you're going to show it to the group of sponsors or members, which includes high-level people from major corporations, which includes high state-level people and King of Thailand or, Bjork or whoever is a sponsor that
or Bill Gates is coming.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And so things have to work. And so you're there at 3 a.m., right?
Oh, yeah. And you always imagine that you could start a month out, and you can, but then you get new ideas. And so you're busy doing the new ideas and the new features still.
That was a nice pressure. Demo week was a nice deadline and opportunity to show something and not just film something and not just talk about something and not just draw a picture of something.
Yes. It had to function. Mostly.
But there was flexibility. It mostly was good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. What was lovely there was demonstrating potential, which was what people came to see.
Right. Where could this go? Yeah.
We weren't showing a finished product. We were just showing the proof that something was possible, which is so much more exciting.
Yeah, it was really nice being a student there. I actually got a whole electrical engineering degree and didn't really know how to make a circuit yet. Like technically I knew how to analyze a circuit and I had put many circuits together by following many diagrams. But then like at midnight, like you said, there's a lot of this midnight stuff. At midnight in the cube with like Noah Vauder over here and Mark Feldemeyer not too far away and Mikey Siegel. So different people who are really good at circuitry. And then I would run into a problem. And then I would also be sitting next to people and hear their conversation. I learned a lot. Like when you turn on an LED, everyone who learns on the street knows you have to put a resistor in line with the LED so the battery doesn't burn it out. Unless it's a very small battery. But I didn't even know that. And I had I had a very high GPA with a degree and stuff like that. So
It's funny, all the things that you only learn once you start making things. We had so much trouble when I was trying to get our group renamed the Flammable Robots Group. Because we kept having fires for similar reasons. We were working a lot with like stacks and stacks of batteries because we jumped in and we were making mobile robots for performance and we didn't know anything about it. And that shouldn't be an obstacle. I loved that attitude. I'd actually run into it elsewhere in the world before I was there. Well, I was just giving a talk yesterday and I had to pull out the story of, I call it the hovercraft story. When I worked at the Museum of Science in Boston a long time ago, a whole other life working with the exhibit department there, I'd been handed the software parts. It's what I did back then, primarily, of a big project. And that meant that my friend Peter got the job of prototyping a rideable hovercraft that people would come to play with. And I was happy for him.
we don't even have that yet. What's going on?
I was happy for him, but I was like, I wish that was me. So I went back to my desk and I sort of spent the rest of the day outlining how I might approach that problem. There were like 40 days basically to come up with a proof of concept sort of thing. And I was looking at the materials, the skirt, the shape of the skirt, the pitch of the propellers and things, and how you produce different types of thrust. And
the skirt on the hoverboard?
The skirt on the hovercraft underneath that
like,
keeps the air gap, an even air gap underneath.
Oh, more of a car size and less of a board size.
More of a car size. Yeah, like a big rideable one.
Yeah.
And I thought that in 40 days, I could probably work my way through and have a thing. But 2, maybe 3 days later, he calls me on the office telephone. He said, Andy, you got to come down here and ride the hovercraft. And I'm like, how is this even possible? And I went down there and it was a platform with a bunch of like weird lifter pads from McMaster that were just pneumatic and an office chair with a lever, and you push the lever forward and backwards, and a couple of like standard like department store fans in the back with like shift left and right. And so everything about it was wrong, except that you could sit in it and it would lift and you could go. And it was terribly dangerous. We spent the afternoon crashing it into everything in the workshop and laughing. But that was such an education for me right there, because I was learning how to prototype well. Like just get it working to start with. Don't make a product. Like take the fun.
That is something that people who don't already know, I think, need to know, and that we all need to remember if we do already know. When you want to get something, there's different types of things you can get working, things that people already know how to make work. So if you're trying to make something work and there's already instructions for it, or people have made it work many times before, this does not apply. If you're trying to poke a hole in the edge of reality, just a little hole, that hovercraft wasn't, okay, that's not the edge of reality, but
well, that was a personal version for him because he didn't know how to make a hovercraft.
That's right.
Either.
There's the personal edge too. And so when you're working on that edge, there's a methodology where you go deep first, you don't think top down, you try to get everything in place, you turn on all the fans, it's not lifting up yet. That's okay. Maybe you leave the fans on and you start adjusting them while they're running. And that's called real-time feedback and fast iteration loops in a design language. Mm-hmm. And then you can like feel with your hand, oh, why is there not enough force? And you keep everything running and adjust it. And it's dangerous and it's intuitive and
it's fast and it is fun. And it is the superpower that enables you to make things that you don't know how to make. As you were saying, like if I was building cabinets for my clients, I would be able to calculate exactly what would happen on each project at the beginning. But I'm usually committing to making something that I have no idea how to make at the time, and I'm not worried about it. I'll figure it out.
And even cabinet makers oftentimes measure everything ahead of time, but then they also measure as they go.
Oh, true.
So it's like, but even in that case, right? But yeah. But when you're pushing the edge of something, like you have made a lot of things that nobody has thought of before or made before. And in the like huge musical instruments, which I'm assuming we'll get to talk about and show footage of. And when you're in a situation like that, you can't know if it'll work. You just have to start. The materials will have a conversation with you, is what people say.
Yeah, I usually say, if you don't know what you're doing, if you know what you're doing, then you should start prototyping right away. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you should definitely start prototyping right away.
There we go.
Just start making things. A prototype isn't a product in the way that we like what we do here in the studio. The prototypes are tests, and what you're getting is understanding. You're accumulating knowledge about something. I tell people all early prototypes should look like they were assembled at gunpoint. Like
That's good advice.
something about it might need to be precise or complex or correct in some way.
Yeah, but you
most of it
decide with the
doesn't.
gun on you decide which part needs to be correct.
Right. And then everything else, you can make it out of cardboard. And I
Right.
use like a lot of cardboard and tape because what we're doing, we're just getting an answer so we can get to the next thing. There's something that I've started to call the speculation barrier just so that I can learn to get past it.
What is the speculation
The
barrier?
speculation barrier is what I was describing, me thinking that it would take me 40 days to understand enough to get a hovercraft lifted. That's because I thought that I would speculate about a lot of things and do a whole lot of math and do a lot of reading on various subjects, and all those are good things. But there's also a path through. Well, I get stuck in the speculation barrier where I start to think about what might be wrong, what could happen, or how I might solve a problem. And
Yeah.
mostly the questions are swirling and I'm just sitting there thinking about it and I make no progress at all.
Oh,
when I'm
because
at
you
the
didn't start.
speculation barrier. What I usually need to do is recognize. For a little while in my studio, I had a crew where we would stop and call it like, wait, speculation barrier.
Oh, nice.
Just get an answer. Like we're like, oh, I think I know what's wrong with this large complex system. Like, okay, just go check it.
There's something about starting to build. And as you build, I've noticed as I start building that speculation barrier, you breach it right away. And then you start imagining the path to finishing the part of the prototype you're building. And as your hands move, you start to lay out that path and you can see any problems more clearly because you're moving through the landscape and you get closer to various decision points and you can see farther.
I experienced that too. I started calling that the dark forest of possibilities.
Oh, I love all this terminology.
I've had to make up a lot of these things because I hire people and I usually take it fairly seriously, especially if they're an intern. They're not slave labor like a lot of interns. No one's fetching me coffee.
I'll get you coffee.
I have a job. Thank you. I have a job for to sort of teach people what I wish I had known when I was just starting out, like they are.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of that, the stuff that nobody tells you. And one of them is sometimes you're in the dark forest of possibilities. You know that there's a solution out there, like a clearing on the far side of some forest. You're standing somewhere in this dark forest. There's all these winding paths. You can only see down them a little way. You don't actually know where this one leads or whether these are connected up ahead or, but you have to keep making choices and they cost resources. They cost time, especially. But also potentially things that you're buying, or sometimes you're paying money to a crew.
Yeah.
You create prototypes to get a little further down, and then you can see now you've got some new paths, and you can see a little ways down that, and you navigate your way through this way, and you end up with something that is kind of like an accumulation of all of these solutions. And you get to some workable solution at the far side of the forest.
Right, right. And I actually used to think about it like city blocks. I like the forest better, but in the city block metaphor, you can't see left and right until you walk a block, and then you can look left and right.
Oh,
And there is something
yeah.
about moving to see. And so the speculation barrier,
Yeah.
when you're stuck in speculation, you aren't moving to see. And actually business people do this all the time, which I had to learn because I'm not very trained in business, but they will make a decision, not because they think they're right, but so that they can learn something. Let's move forward, in business
Right.
or in prototyping. Let's move forward. I made the decision. Oh no, what if it's wrong? We'll find out.
Yes, that all the prototypes are successful if they are informative.
And you had another term too, that was about coming up with ideas.
Yeah,
I forgot
Well,
what
I
it
had
was,
to say
though.
this only. It's a question that had never occurred to me, but I'd give a talk or give an interview, and somebody will ask you, "Oh, so where do your ideas come from?
Yes.
Do you do a lot of brainstorming, or do you have like a thing? Is there like a room that you go to and you light a candle? Is there like?" And it's, it all comes from. Well, I learned to just start calling it irresponsible fantasizing.
That one. Yes. I love this.
And this is something that you do when you're just out when I'm riding my bike to work, when I'm showering, when I'm walking somewhere. So there's a lot more going on in all of our brains than the conscious process. There's stuff that you can feel rubbing up against that. You can kind of see it from there. And I feel like that, where I'm keeping my brain sort of entertained a lot of the time, mostly imagining things that I might be excited about. And that's where a lot of these ideas come from, is just kind of fantasizing like, no, but like a gigantic blue cube. But you can't go and,
But the fantasizing is one thing, but when you throw irresponsible on it as a modifier, it feels like, I don't know, you said a gigantic blue cube. So then I'm like, well, if I can just be irresponsible, if I'm allowed to just, okay, well, what if the big blue cube is on my head? What if it's 50 feet across? That's really, really dumb. But you gave me permission, and permissioning is a big thing in brainstorming or in being creative or in just actualizing your own dreams and imagination into reality. I can imagine that. And what if the 50-foot blue cube is on my, that doesn't work. What if it's attached to my feet? Oh, those are kind of like stilts, but they're huge shoes, but they'll bump into each other. That's okay. I'm being irresponsible right now. Let's keep going with this.
Yeah, I think that this is also so nobody would question me about like, well, that's a dumb idea. And I'm like, it's not even an idea. I'm just having irresponsible fantasies. The thing that I think I end up discovering in this process is usually not something that can be executed. But there's something that I'm excited about. And sometimes I say, okay, well, can I take what I'm excited about in this idea and find a practical way to bring this to life? And that's when you start to get into like more of the design process.
Right.
But I always want to capture this at the beginning because I want it to feel sincere. Like I have to be excited about the thing I'm going to make. I know it's possible to fool people, right? You can do stuff where you're like, oh, I think this is dumb, but people just lap this stuff up. And you can probably do that and sell product or something, but I don't want to be that kind of
Well, I think it just won't come alive.
I'm kind of with you there. There's this Venn diagram that I have in my head of this stuff that's, like the two overlapping circles. And one of them is like the stuff that really is meaningful to you, like sincerely.
Yeah.
And the other one is stuff that like you really believe might be meaningful to other people in the audience who are going to experience whatever you're creating.
Right.
And the rule is not that you try to get in the overlap of the two, but like you don't ever leave the overlap of those two things.
Yeah.
Because outside on one of these is just pandering.
Yeah,
right.
It is.
And
a lot of companies are doing that.
Yeah. And then outside the other one is insincere wankery for the most part, or no, pretentious wankery.
I mean, you're allowed to do it for fun.
Right. Well, that's the stuff that like just you like. But if I'm trying to produce things that I know, like I'm into this, but I know that other people are not like into this
totally
weird obsessive detail that I'm into.
Yeah.
I won't really produce stuff.
Well, I think the best way to have someone fall in love with your art or your brand or to make a sincere impact on the world, but just take the kind of traditional business idea of how do you get someone to fall in love with your brand, right? Well, like, I don't know because I don't study marketing at all, but my answer to that is put your whole heart into your brand. Be sincere that you think it will be really meaningful to a bunch of people, and be authentic in that. Put everything forward, and then people will see that in the design, in the talks that you give about it, in the way that the packaging works, in everything, and they'll read that authenticity, and then you don't have to trick them.
Yeah, no, I love this about some mediums that lend themselves to this. So then, yeah, you don't have to generate imaginary sensations of value or something like that. Like it's actually something meaningful to people. Music is like this in a pretty good way where you can't tell somebody your music is good if you're a composer. Like they feel it or they don't feel it. In fine art, you can put a big provenance label or a manifesto connected to it that will become a lens through which people see the work. And people can be deceptive that way. I don't have anyone in mind when I say it. I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah. And all of your work relates to music. I mean, a lot of the work that I've seen of yours relates to music. And you have a music background.
Somewhat. Yeah.
But you played in a punk band.
Oh, yeah. I played a lot when I was young here in New York.
So you grew up here? I didn't know.
Well, I came here the day after I graduated high school.
Okay.
That was quite a shock. I was 17 years old.
I'm sure.
And I didn't drop into like a school program or anything like that. just kind of came here planning that I would get a job and maybe play music and do things like that.
Yeah. So you came on a dream.
Came on a dream, like a lot of people do.
They do.
And I think it's a lot of what I love about this city is that it's full of people who came here to invent and or discover a version of themselves that they always kind of felt was there.
Yeah, there's something beautiful about it, especially when it ends well. Well, what did you play in the punk band?
Oh, I always played the drums,
Okay.
but I sometimes played piano and bass too. Though I'm not especially good at them, but I do love to play them.
So with drums, was it like a fast kind of poppy punk, like boom tap boom tap boom tap boom tap?
Oh, I was all over the place.
Everything.
What I really loved was really, really long patterns. I liked layering. This was back when I was more Aspergerish about it, but
So you're doing innovative punk.
I would be laying in other time signatures on top, but in kind of a subtle.
Don't do that in punk.
Oh, they
Okay.
you have to sneak it in
Nice.
just a little bit here and there, and it opens up this little dimension in the sound. And if you do it carefully,
Yeah.
even though you're playing pretty simply, you can still do that.
So I listened to a lot of like my first punk band I think I heard was Bad Religion. Then my friend showed me No Effects. And then I went backwards from there to older stuff. But No Effects is my all-time favorite punk band. What about you? What are your
I'll have
influences?
to think about that and
Okay,
come
yeah.
back to it because
Yeah.
it's been so long. I
Yeah.
did go back and listen to a bunch of music that I was so passionate about
Yeah.
in my teens.
Yeah.
And I thought it was all terrible.
Yeah.
But
It is terrible.
it is
But
terrible.
it doesn't matter. It just
It's
seemed
terrible.
real to you at the time.
Oh, it also portended so many exciting things about the future.
Yeah.
I loved that so much of that music, it sounds terrible to me now because it's not imbued with this hope of a world that was just full of passionate excitement in the moment,
Yeah.
because a lot of that world, I've already lived the world that came after my teens.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound the same to me now. But when I listen to it, I understand it.
There's something you're trying to do when you're 17 and you come to New York, or when you're in your 20s, you're in a phase of life. Like people think you only grow until you're 18. Sometimes people think that, but you're growing physically and psychologically, like even literally physically, like until you die. And Steiner had this, like every 7 years, these new ages new phases of growth that you enter into. Like I was just in the age of loneliness recently. Now I'm in the age of community. Like, the point is we're always growing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so like you're in your 20s and you're just in this, you're on this soul search, you're looking for adventure. You're charged with testosterone or with just being young, just with energy and
putting together your model of the world in these big chunks. You remember the excitement of plugging in a big thing like, oh, now everything makes sense. I've just discovered subjectivity,
right?
Or I've just discovered the importance of setting expectations correctly in social situations.
Oh my God, I only learned expectations like 5-10 years ago.
Well, this is what I mean.
Yeah.
But these big things, I think I always want to tell people in their 20s, now, this is lovely. This is us saying to nobody and everybody the things that we aren't going to say to specific people. Boy, things generally get so much better for most people after their 20s.
I've read that.
Because my brain didn't feel good at all in my 20s.
Wow.
And it feels a whole lot better now. I'm so much calmer and my things are all in harmony much more than they ever were.
I think there's a peacefulness to growing up that I didn't expect to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the chaos when I was young, and now I appreciate the chaos, and I also appreciate the calm layer underneath it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you too. I couldn't imagine. I saw that older people, they liked this thing about calmness and harmony, and all I wanted was more stimulation, more intellectual
more
ideas, more randomness that would like cause different parts of your brain to connect. And,
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine ever not wanting that all the time.
So you came as a teenager, and were you already making art installations? Like I didn't even know that I could make art installations, although I would goof off and, like glue and tape a bunch of old electronics together and make things that looked like robots. Like I didn't even know that was an art installation or that I was making media art or anything like that. But like, I think I learned almost when I got to Media Lab, like that I could be a serious media artist or something, but were you already making and putting things out? Or what was the first thing you made? I mean, it's hard to draw the line, but what was the first art piece that you made?
What was the first art piece that
Now if I Google Andy Cavatorta, like art piece, like some come up, right? Like,
Yeah,
like,
well, but it
was
was,
there a first? How did you get into it? Like, how did you cross over from not having made these things to making these things?
You were mentioning this thing about permissioning.
Yes.
I think media art for a lot of us became a permission. So I think my first installation was a public installation in downtown Boston in the Leather District, where I mounted a couple of cathode ray tubes, one of them in a small one in landscape mode and a large one in portrait mode.
So these are the things that go in the back of a television system.
Yes, like an old school television.
Yep.
And some video cameras and a little bit of capture stuff and some computation, and probably in the around 2000, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it would capture the bodies of people who stop and look at it and capture images of their heads. And then it would be recombining people's bodies and heads. And I just thought that it was playful and fun to be able to do this sort of exquisite.
Is this like one of those
strangers.
like pick a body, pick a head, mismatch?
Except it was just doing this at random with people that had been captured stopping and looking at it.
Nice.
So if you stop and look at it now, your head, just observing it makes you enter the piece
Right.
in the future. And I didn't actually have a lot to say about it, except that I thought that it was funny that you could be walking past something and have this weird, rather personal experience with it. And then it puts someone else's head on your body, or your head on someone else's body. So there was not a lot. That was probably the first piece that I did.
Yeah. 22 years ago.
Yeah. And because of media art, I was able to not criticize, like destroy every single idea with criticism and doubt, like from the very beginning. You know what I mean?
No, I don't. Tell me.
Oh, well, that's what I'd be like. Oh, I'm not an artist. Oh, I'm not going to paint something and then say I'm a good painter, or
Right.
sculpt a piece of clay and it looks like a not particularly talented.
So you're saying
child.
moving out of fine art allowed you the freedom to think that you could create something, because I almost see media art as saying like, hey, you know, all the genres like painting and like sculpting and like concert piano and these well-established areas. If you go outside of a well-established area, you can play around more. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what about you? What was like the first creative work that you were doing? Because your bristling creativity back in the lab was one of the things that made you legendary there.
I always had ideas to do stuff, but like the media lab helped me learn how to put things together quicker with software and electronics and things like that. The first thing I did at the lab, and I wasn't even in the lab yet, it was called Emotional DJ, and somewhat related to the piece you talked about. It was a face tracker, and it would allow you to manipulate people's facial expressions in real time. So I'd point a webcam, I have a laptop, point a webcam at people, then have a projector. The projector goes onto the wall. And then we'd use just like a super old school face tracker, really basic, to find somebody's face. And then I used a mesh warp. So once you know someone's face, you take the middle of it, you assume it's their nose, and then you go up from there to find the eyebrows and the mouth. And then you can turn their mouth down or up to make them frown or smile and make them excited and or angry.
Involving the mesh.
Yeah, just with, there was just like this C file called mesh.c that I was just utilizing from online. And that gave us the ability to have like 4 knobs to tweak people's eyebrows, 2 points on their eyebrows and 2 points on their mouth. And I wasn't at Media Lab yet. And I went over to, and I was just sped up with electrical engineering as a culture. Like, I remember the moment actually when I lost it. I mean, it was a building, right? But I was in a class, it was a Alan Wilsky class, and he's a classic feedback and controls guy at MIT. He wrote the book, literally. And he was talking about guided missile systems as the example for a feedback and controls math problem. So we were learning feedback and controls, and I'm like, really, this is the example? And he's talking about this missile that's gonna hit its target. And at the time, I'm really sensitive to, I think like at that exact time, I think the war in Iraq had started not that long ago. And I'm like, this can't be what I'm working on. Like, I can't work on this. And there was one guy I was friends with in the EE department was sitting next to me. He was like a Spanish DJ guy. And I was crying and he was like, dude, are you okay? And I was like, I don't think I'm okay. Like, I can't work on guided missile systems. Can't be my job. like I
This is a very good sign.
I mean, I could work on like a TI calculator. Like I could. I didn't want to, but I could. But I can't work on a missile system. That's too much.
No.
And so I was crying and I left the class and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I can't stay in this. So I go to the head of the EE department at the time and I said, I think I have to leave. And he's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. My advisor who sent me here, Ron Schaefer from Georgia Tech, who used to be at MIT, he's coming next week. Maybe he'll help me. He mentioned I should check out Media Lab. And the guy in charge of the electrical engineering department at the time, whose name I don't remember, said, well, there's room for everybody in the hierarchy. So, maybe you can just go down to Media Lab. And I was like, I didn't even understand what he was saying. And I just left. And then I thought about it. He's like, oh, he said, I'm a loser. And so I left and I went over to Media Lab the next week. My old professor, Ron, introduced me to the emotional computing woman, Roz Picard, the computing culture guy, Chris Csikszentmihalyi, and the creative learning guy, Mitch Resnick. And I met all of them. And I remember showing Roz Picard this emotional DJ setup because she said, what do you do for research? And I was like, I don't really do research. And she's like, well, she was smart. She said, what do you do at night after your work is done? And I'm like, oh, well, I've been working on this emotional DJ thing. And I explained it to her and she said, oh, that is research. We could use that for people with autism to help learn facial expressions. We could use it as an emotional toy. There's all kinds of uses for that. And I was like, no. I'm just using this like at the enormous room. I'm working clubs with it. I'm working with musicians with it. She's like, no, this is research. And I'm like, you're telling me I can do that here? I'm like, sign me up.
Oh, that's such a good story.
And so I made this and I didn't even know that it was important, quote unquote, research. And then she, I guess, permissioned it at that moment in time. And I, of course, had made things before that, but that was the moment where I'm like, oh my God, the crazy shit I like to make is important to somebody.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's so nice that so we may have been applying at similar times. I just wrote to a bunch of PIs and asked to meet with them.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up getting in. There wasn't a big formal application process.
No, same here. The three of them I just spoke with them and there seemed to be a match or a spark.
Yeah. No, it's so wonderful. There are things that a school like MIT can do that there are ways that they can be loose and informal that smaller schools can't.
I think getting into grad school is always like a matching and a relationship between you and the advisor. And it's the old apprenticeship model. I think people don't know this about grad school, especially if they haven't gone through yet, that they're taking you on. And if a professor wants you in their department at many schools, they can just get you in. I mean, obviously you have to be able to do the work or else it won't work, but they can pull you in if they think you're the right researcher for them. And so it's really important not to choose the school, but to choose a person. That's what I think about grad school.
Oh, I think that's amazing advice. I also didn't know that on my way in.
Me neither.
Yeah. It's funny. I had never finished undergrad. I'd actually never even officially matriculated.
So you got into grad school without finishing undergrad?
Yeah. No, without even really ever officially matriculating.
What was your undergrad degree?
Physics.
Cool.
Yeah. Or I had taken most of the physics course at UMass Boston.
Okay.
Or most of the physics curriculum. But I got a job doing graphics, which turned into a job writing software. And I was learning so much. It was the early days it was the web boom.
Yeah.
And it was exciting. And I just put all that on pause for a while. And then eventually, I was starting to bump up against that ceiling.
Yeah.
In the tech world, people want to know what you can do usually, and they don't really care about your GPA.
Yeah.
That's like not a thing anyone cares about.
Yeah.
And, however, Dan Goods at NASA, somehow I was introduced to him and he was trying to bring me into work on a project with him there. and they couldn't hire me because I didn't have a degree.
That does happen.
Yeah. Well, I understand it's public money.
Well,
So they have a
government
lot of constraints.
institutions, corporations, then they are looking for degrees still. Maybe not in computer scientists always, but sometimes.
But that's when I ran into, I was like, okay, I can't let this kind of thing happen again. I was hanging out with Layla Hassan, and she was telling me about this amazing career stuff that she'd been doing, where she was on some sort of a TV show, I think with Jeff, where they had dropped them into Namibia to work on some project together. It was one of those, that little boomlet of like engineering TV shows.
I remember what you're talking about. This was like here's a crazy engineering challenge, go. And they were competing.
Yeah.
I don't know the name of the show though.
She was telling me that at the time they were trying to see if they could get them onto a Russian rocket to get them into space to work on something. And like, I was just astounded that I'm standing there talking with her. And I was like, did MIT open up these opportunities for you? And she said, yes. And I was like, all right. So that's when I was like, I guess I have to apply. I was trying to think of what I needed to do before leaving Boston.
Right.
And so, okay, I was like, and I'd been doing all this work with robotics and music for a little while. And when I applied to the lab, I was like, well, I have a big portfolio full of executed ideas.
You had already made some musical robots.
I'd already made a lot of stuff.
Like, I think we should talk about I want you to tell me about some of the stuff you made before you got in and or after. I mean, whatever makes sense. But I think that some of your musical robots stand out in people's minds who know your work as something larger than life, and that you were cooperating with Bjork, and I came to your house and met Imogen Heap, and you're cooperating with these famous musicians and building these like if I look to my right now, I see I think it's called The Whale on the screen. You're monitoring a larger than life music installation. And this shows us we can go big. And so I want you to tell people about some of these things.
Oh, sure. Boy, where do I start?
I know, right?
Well, so back in the old days, by the way, how does that whale look? Is everything moving nicely?
Yeah, everything's spinning. I can't hear it, but everything is.
That's fine.
Okay, just making sure it's still up and running.
Oh, making sure that it's all good and healthy. I took out a bunch of the software temporarily that looks for any kind of aberrations in current usage and things like that. It's got 14 motors that are strong enough to break an arm in there. So if things go wrong, they could go kind of destructively wrong. That's why I watch it and feel anxiety.
So what's on this thing? I'm looking at it. I see that there are approximately 20 different areas where there are pipes, and all the pipes are spinning.
Oh, well, I can talk about this, and then I'll talk about.
Well, here it is. So
yeah, it's over here. So it's there are 14 layers of rotors, and when this spins, it creates a shape that's approximately circular. It's shaped a bit like a whale, and each one of those rotors contains corrugated plastic tubing on two sides, like a propeller. The corrugated plastic tubing, when you spin it, air will be whipped through the tube, and depending upon the speed at which you rotate it, it will change the speed at which air travels through the tube.
Is this like one of those toys that's like a little spring that's like 1 yardstick long, and it's like colorful tube, and you spin it and it goes.
You spin it.
Wee, wee.
Except, yes, but it's a custom extrusion, and it's bigger, and it's and they're quite a bit longer. So I get a lot of lower tones, and it's a good deal more sonorous and less shrill.
Right.
But the same idea. And so the way it works, if I'm going to go into it, there are all those little corrugations in the tubing. Actually, I should talk about why the air moves. I thought that it was the Bernoulli effect, right? That the air is moving over the open end of the tube the same way.
It's like when you spin this thing, there's like a centrifugal force that makes the air particles want to flow through it.
If you imagine it being filled with water or sand.
Yeah, right. If you took a pipe, filled it with water, and whipped it, the water would want to fly right out, right?
That's exactly why the air ends up whipping through it.
Yeah.
So as the air goes flying through the tube, there are all those little tiny corrugations, and the air kind of makes these little vortices, little bits of turbulence all the way down. And most of the way through, it's not coherent in any way. They're all just sort of random noise.
So it's not a smooth pipe on the inside? I know the toy's not smooth, but even yours are not smooth?
No, those are not. No, they're corrugated on the inside. At certain energies, there's just the right energy to make one standing wave the length of the pipe.
Cool.
And when that standing wave starts to bounce back and forth, all of the other sort of random drifting ones that aren't constrained to any particular frequency, all of those start to get entrained because there's a wave passing over them. So now the vortices are adding energy. Boom, boom, boom. That's why when you hear one of these, it's very voice-like. It sounds like a choir because it's full of oscillators.
That's why it sounds so magical. So each of the little bumps, there's, you know, in one of the toys, there must be like 100 bumps along the length of it. And each of those is causing a bunch of chaotic airflows where things are just spinning around. And when a standing wave comes, it like shapes all the chaos into their own little resonant waves. It kind of provides like a, I don't know, like it presses all the chaos down. So it like has a smaller space to work in. It organizes it.
It organizes all the chaos.
I did not know why those sounds were made. That's really interesting.
Oh, yeah, they call it entrainment. They're sort of freely flowing, those little vortices. And if a bit of wave energy passes over them, it will discharge them each time, like boom, boom, boom. So in a way, the wave energy synchronizes all of them. And it is a self-reinforcing feedback loop up and down. However, I won't go into the complications. There's a little bit of frequency spread because the ends of the tube behave a little differently from the center of the tube. Same thing happens on a guitar string or a piano string.
Right. The end points have a special case because they're at the end.
They do. This. The simple physics involves an infinitely long string or an infinitely long column of air. Adding the ends.
Well, you make pretty big stuff, so you could just get one of those.
I'll just buy an infinite tube. Yeah.
So where's this at? Where's this? The whale? Is it called the whale?
It's called the whale, and it's sitting in the MIT Museum right now. Oh, so I was going to say, if you spin this a little faster, you then start to get, so when you have one wave, you could visualize the wave energy being like higher or lower. If we talk about a string, it's easy to think of it this way.
Yeah, when you pluck a string, it kind of bounces up and down like that.
But if you play a harmonic on a string, you'll get, let's say, 2 points like this, where it goes bing, bing, and it's
right. Like if on a guitar, if you put your finger over the 5th or 7th or 12th fret, in other words, in the middle of the string, if you just cover it a little and pluck it,
if you just touch
it's almost like you're cutting the string in half, and it forces a vibration on 2 different vibrations. Is that what happens?
Exactly. Okay. And you can go up with 3 or 4. When you swing a long jump rope.
So wait, if I put my finger on 2 places on the guitar string at the same time and pluck it, we can have a different harmonic than if I put my finger only in one place on the string?
In theory, yeah, you could.
I've never done that.
Well, you could also put your finger at the 1/3 mark.
Okay.
And then
that I've done. Yeah.
And that will bring it up an octave plus a 5th.
Okay.
An octave and a half.
I've done that, yeah. Like Pearl Jam guitar riffs have that in them. Like, yeah.
That's what harmonics, fun to play with harmonics.
Yeah.
So anyway, each one of those tubes can make different pitches. Like each one can make 3 pitches. They could go higher, but they start to sound shrill. So I don't do that.
So you use 2 pitches on each tube.
Yeah.
And there's 14 tubes.
And then there's a piece of music that's composed that lasts 200 years. Because I was thinking a lot about longevity and what we experience in a lifetime. There's been some deaths in my family recently, and it makes me think a lot about the finiteness of all of this. I was reading about bowhead whales, and bowhead whales can live to be 225, 250 years old. And they're like us. They've got like big, like wrinkly brains, and they're social and they're creative, and they have relationships and all the complexities of living in a world where people are being, members of your community are being born or dying, or there's conflicts or there's separations, and basically all these sort of human relatable dramas. So I've always had cats, right? And it's easy to think of other animals in a patronizing sort of way. My cats could never imagine the scope of what I experience in my long human lifespan. Their lives are shorter. And it makes us feel like their lives are smaller and sort of less than ours. And I thought it was nice to think about, to the whales, we are the cats. Like we're the creatures who couldn't imagine what the kind of scope of experience they have.
So the music that's playing 14 times 2, 28 possible notes, and it is playing something right now that won't finish until the year 2222? Or something like that?
So yeah, something like that. So it's well, I've only done a few years out so far in the computation of it. So what I'm using a lot of whale songs and a lot of the 77 compositions of Hildegard von Bingen that have survived to this day. And I combined all of these to train a recurrent neural network to be able to generate a lot of music inspired by the mixture of all of these things.
So what's the significance of Hildegard?
Well, let's see. It's hard to talk about whales without talking about whale conservation or the impending extinction of a lot of them. And so Hildegard von Bingen, well, she talked about a lot of things. She wrote about the end of days quite a bit. She talked about there being life inside of objects, whether it's an AI, and what I'm thinking about life inside of things that aren't human, like the possibility of what she called the light, the living light. In writing about the end of days, she would take from the Book of Enoch, the story about, what was there? There's I can't remember the land creature, the behemoth and the leviathan, which come into the Bible from Jewish mythology. And the leviathan was the enormous chaos monster that lives in the sea. That is slain by God at the end of days and fed to the righteous. And this idea about the end of the world and the end of days and the last giant creature in the sea being slain, I wanted to have a way of invoking and talking about the impending extinction of a lot of these whale species without having to say it. If I could save whales by raising awareness about this, that would be great. But I know that I haven't had to give a talk about it yet. And somebody will challenge me and say well, why don't you talk about et cetera? And I'll have to say is there anybody in the room who doesn't know? We all know. I don't know what to do about it, but we all know about the whales and their plight. But this is perhaps a way to think about them with reverence and wonder instead of being patronizing because they're not humans.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it, I'm trying to look at you while you're talking, but you have your art installation running on the side. So I keep looking at it and it's running live.
Yeah, I've been
And so yeah, I think just having this up and running gives us a chance because you had this reckless, what is it called? No, irresponsible fantasizing, maybe. No, irresponsible fantasy about creating this, presumably. And you made it and you installed it and it's running. And now because it's running, I can look at it and now we can talk about it. And we're not just talking about an idea, although that would be fine, but I can show this on the screen and we can listen to it and you can tell me about Hildegard, who I didn't know about. Oh. And so just by manifesting this from your imagination into real life, it does make something else real. And now we can talk about it and that's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. It's weird when I always feel like there's this thing where you're reaching out into the future, forming this thing somewhere in the future that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And then eventually you get there and now there's this thing that once existed only in the imagination. I don't know how to put this in a way that actually captures how odd it seems to me sometimes. The irresponsible fantasy for me about the whale was I was originally drawing versions of this that must have been 60 feet long or 100 feet long, that would go in the machine hall at the Tate Modern. And people would lie down underneath it.
Oh, yeah, we have to do this. Who's in charge of the Tate Modern?
Yeah.
Get him on the phone.
Yeah, no, so I'd love to do that version.
Yes, but laying under it would be amazing, except that it was going to rip people's faces off, you said, but...
No, it's not going to rip it.
You just said it was so strong, the motor.
Oh, it could. Basically, yeah, don't go sticking children into it.
Right. Or you could have a protective... You could actually have mesh wire around it if you needed to or something.
Well, I think that space is, I don't know, it's extremely tall.
Oh, okay, so it could be...
You can hang it way, way above.
Gotcha.
And then people can lie down on the floor.
That would be awesome.
Underneath it and listen to it. Because
I would love to see that happen.
I would love to see it happen. I guess I should. I never make my own opportunities and I should.
Well, this is this is related to this permissioning stuff, right? If you had someone standing next to you who was in charge of all museums in the past saying, you really could do this. Why don't you go ahead? And then, then you would have permission, but we have to learn to give ourselves permission, but it is hard and it's extremely empowering, but it doesn't matter what level you're working at. There's always a level where you don't think you should do something.
It is really
and you stop
odd.
yourself.
And I'm aware of that, and yet I still run into it all
Look,
the
like
time.
a lot of people would look at the work you've done and say like, you can't stop yourself. Like you're who I'm looking up to. And yet still both of us, I think at times are like, oh, I can't do that. Right. But we have to leap over that.
At some point, it's funny. Yeah, my work, because I struggle so much to make the projects and I struggle so much between them, it's never gotten easier because I keep getting larger. I get very large budgets for these projects and I spend all of it on the people. Because every one of them is an opportunity to do the best work I've ever done. And that's the only thing I really care about. It's my motivation. If I had to like start kind of phoning it in so I could stick more of the budget in my pocket, I would feel like I might as well just go get a job because that would be this far more certainty.
So we've got to talk about some more of your pieces because this brought up so much good stuff. And I think that there's a few things that come to mind. One of them, though, was my personal experience. And I don't know if anything came out of this, but one day you emailed like a group of us and said, hey, Imogen Heap's coming over to my house tomorrow and she wants some ideas. And so let's get some students together. And so I came over and we brainstormed with her about some musical instruments. Did you end up making something for her or with her?
I didn't. Ellie Jessup
Oh, yeah.
did.
A lab mate of yours.
Wasn't she like just a lovely guest and visitor coming over?
Yeah, she was not a pop star at all. She was collaborative and humble and very open to ideas. It was really nice meeting her.
Ellie Jessup developed that concept with the gloves that turned into the Mimu gloves that Kelly Snook was working on with Ariana Grande and other people.
Okay, so Ellie developed some gloves that let you control music, and that spread to another media labber who then did take it to market, or whatever you want to call it, to art.
Yeah.
With some other famous musicians.
Yeah, so it actually, that idea that was born that night went in a lot of different directions.
Right, so that brainstorm did lead somewhere. That was
Although
cool.
it was, the root of it was always Ellie. There's a lot of people who grabbed onto it and like sort of ran with it in different directions. Ellie is not the person who would ever say that was my idea, but I always think of that when I see this.
Yeah, so she had the seeds of that idea.
And she had made prototypes.
I saw that. She took it to Maker Faire once with me and demoed it there
Yeah.
at Maker Faire San Francisco.
How she would sing and pull the notes out of her mouth or hold them and sustain them or swash them, just with all of these gestures to modify so she could sing with a sample of herself.
It was
that
like a
very
guitar
articulate.
pedal for your voice that you used with your hand.
Yes.
And that you used gesturally with your hand. So much more
I
than
can see why you're not in marketing. It's like a guitar pedal for your voice that you use with your hand.
That's terrible.
Actually, that'd be hilarious. I would look at a product that could. It was just
Okay, guys, it's like a kitchen table, but it's a sewing machine, and you throw it in the air, and then everybody runs away. It's like, what do you think?
Ta-da!
Okay, but you did deploy at least one, and maybe a lot of musical instruments with Bjork, and Bjork is a legend upon legend.
Oh, yes.
In my mind. And so you've got to tell us about working with her, and the gravity harp was the one that I know of. But
Yeah, well, I developed, oh boy. Now we're going back once again to the very beginning of my studio. That was my first big project.
that was the one.
Yeah.
You landed just a Bjork instrument for your first one, but
Oh, yeah.
how did that happen? And
Well, I have to tell a little bit of preamble before
Please
that,
do.
which was I had worked with Christine Southworth's group Ensemble Robot. It's funny, I was just plugging in this lamp over there and the power strip says ER on it because I inherited a lot of the like really mundane things from Ensemble Robot 15 years ago when we broke up, and I still see the name on various tools and parts around here. That was a fun era where there were so many sort of loft parties and strange presentations, and it felt like the people who were the consumers of this sort of tech art and tech performance world were also the same people who were the producers of it, which just lends this lovely authenticity to a scene when I think that there's so little separation. You're giving a performance and you're looking out in the audience knowing that like you're going to go to their show next week and they did something a year ago that inspired.
so there was a real scene.
There's a real scene.
A scene's an important thing, and a scene can and inspire the creation of lots of little things, and you show it to each other. And like we had a demo scene at Media Lab where we would all make and show to each other. And right. So it's nice to have that scene.
It's true. There was a problem inherent to laptop performances in that the person isn't making the music. Somebody would sit down with their laptop and they would push the space bar, and the scrubber would start to go, or the algorithm would start up. And sometimes people would come in to do projections along with this so that there could be something to see while the music sort of unspools. But it was a lot like, as if you had an old LP and you were going to put it down and just play some recorded music for people. It didn't lend itself to performance.
Laptops are not real-time creative. We're not real-time creative, or we're hard to use that way. And they're still hard to use that way.
It's, boy, there were a lot of funny things in that scene, I remember. Anyway, one of them, I remember going to one show and you hear like the email alert sound goes off while the person is doing their laptop performance, because of course they've got their email, or because they look like they're like working on the music, but they just sent an email. So people like pretending to be doing it, or maybe Googling whether or not anybody is live blogging about the performance they're doing right now. But Christine wanted to solve this by having actual physical machines that were electroacoustic instruments that would express the music that way. And I loved this concept.
So you're saying these are machines that would make music from a laptop?
Yeah. So the laptop would be plugged into like a variety of these machines, and the machines would have vibrating strings, vibrating columns of air, all sorts of other.
Okay. So this is like if you were to play an MP3 or play a song out through it
would be like a MIDI file.
Okay. Oh, it would be a MIDI file. It wouldn't be just any song would play through these. Okay.
Right. So it would be like a MIDI file that gets played.
So there would be a composition, which is what basically a MIDI file is. And then that would go out to all these machines. For example, a xylophone with a bunch of hammers hovering over it, waiting to hit them according to the instructions.
Yeah, we have one of those.
Okay.
Yeah. Or more like a glockenspiel.
Okay.
Very, very tinny. That one was fun because a bunch of people involved with this had played in the MIT Gamelan Galactica, the MIT Gamelan Ensemble. And so one of the instruments was one in Balinese gamelan. There are all these beautiful metallic instruments that get played. And there's this huge range of pitches and this huge range of speeds at which things are played. And usually the gongs, that's where the word gong comes from Bali.
Cool.
And they play these beautiful slow melodies that you can tune into if you see the music live. And then the next instrument up from there would be the gangsas, and they're a little higher and they go a little faster. And in the end, you've got these super high-pitched ones that are so fast, two players sit across from each other and they play, one person plays and the other person plays in between those notes. And so they really, really have to synchronize deeply inside. So they play these patterns that just become these textures of notes and sounds. And so we had an instrument, now I can't even remember the name of it, but it was the instrument that would go on top of this. It was higher pitched and it could go even faster. And so we did a lot of work with Gamelan Galactica. The idea that Christine had was that we'd commission composers to write music for live musicians and these machines, and then we do performances that mix the two of them. So you'd have a bunch of live musicians who are playing the composition, and you'd have a bunch of machines that have all been hooked up and they're on stage too, kind of banging and sawing away in various ways.
So there would be like a composition, like it would say like the bass drum should go on the one of every beat. So it would go, then the bass drum would be getting hit by a machine like boom, boom, boom. And then a musician would be, but like a non-robotic musician, a human musician would be looking at the same composition, and they would have some piece they were playing on the cello or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And these performances tended to work out really interestingly. And it was nice just as an exploration of what happens when you have robots and humans playing music together on a stage.
I don't recall seeing that except at Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, I'm just kidding. I don't recall seeing anything like this even now. And this was in 2004,
5.
Yeah, cool.
And it was good, but I learned some really hard lessons back then.
Yeah.
sort of just about durational media and what's important and what isn't. So we would play like regular venues where like you rent, Kresge Auditorium or something like that. And you sell tickets and you have a big audience, and we would sell out. We'd pack a house every time because it was nerdy Cambridge, Massachusetts, where people were like, you have both music and robots, my two favorite things, and it was curiosity that brought everybody in. But 60, 90 seconds max, curiosity satisfied. Everybody's like, oh, I see how it's going to be.
Yeah.
I see what we're doing here. You got the things on stage and people are playing. And now you have like asses in seats for another hour. So you better bring something else. And we talked about this a lot. How do we solve it? Do we have like more novelty? Do we introduce more instruments a little bit at a time? Sort of like in the Stop Making Sense film where the stage is introduced a little bit at a time. Like, how do we make it interesting? And the solution in the long run was that it had to be the same things that make any music performance interesting, which is like
a narrative arc.
A little bit of a narrative arc, but the music itself needs to have a narrative arc. It's all in the music, and the performers can be somewhat performative. But the thing that matters most is that the music is engaging. You've got a seated audience.
I think if you just writing music for robots doesn't mean that the music is captivating. I mean, and just having a single person on stage with one string or one microphone or something like that could be completely captivating.
This is what people care about. People. What's on the cover of every magazine? People. What are all the shows about on TV? People. And that's all perfectly fine. The thing was that concept, I learned, could get people in, and that's nice. But for anything durational, concept is really not very useful. Because there are other things that make it interesting for a period of 30, 60, 90 minutes.
Yeah, so to make anything, you have to have something that gets people in the door. It doesn't literally have to be a door, but in the case of an auditorium, it is.
Yes.
And then you have to have something that's engaging in the beginning, and there has to be like some middling, and there has to be some kind of tie up so people feel good, and there has to be a departure, and then people have to tell other people about it, and you have to have given meaning.
Yeah, and it's so on a practical level for promoting, like you were saying about the people who have to say, when you have a good gimmick, that can get people in the door. So you can say, oh, it's about this. It's rare for somebody to come to me and say, oh, have you seen this film? It's really good. You should see it because it's really good. I'm a busy person. That's not very motivating. I usually want to hear a little bit about what it's about. But that's like concept. But again, concept, you get it right away. Concept happens really quick.
Yeah. So all this stuff was happening, and somehow this formed a basis that you could jump, because you're already making robotic musical instruments with this scene, right?
Oh yeah. So the thing with Bjork,
yeah,
it was funny. She came to the Media Lab, and everybody knew that she was there with Michel Gondry, and I was really psyched about meeting both of them. And they wanted to talk to students and they wanted to see demos. And we just thought we were demoing, like in a conference room somewhere. And so I just walk in, I've got a little presentation with my laptop, and there's like a bunch of people standing outside with their weird things that they've built. They're going to go in and show Bjork my odd thing. And I went in and I sat down and I showed them a lot of this stuff that was electromechanical musical instruments, and exploring how different types of natural phenomena could be used to make music that we haven't really exploited before. There's not a shortage of musical instruments in the world. We humans have been amazingly, exhaustively thorough in overturning all of the possibilities. So it isn't like there's a lot. Only when there are different types of natural phenomena that we haven't harnessed because it requires too much energy or too much precision or too much coordination. There are things that are difficult, and that's where the robots start to become useful by adding machines to it. But it's not new. Like pipe organs in churches were the most complex machines made for about 3 centuries.
They're still really complex. And do you think that they were more complex than any other machine? Like the music machine was the most complex machine?
Oh, it certainly was.
Wow.
Like for about 3 centuries, it was only when the telephone exchange was invented that displaced the complexity, just the number of moving parts.
Like what about something like a printing press? I guess that was only one stamp up and down, right? Okay, I'm just trying to think of other machines. And there were pneumatic robots in the late 1800s probably, but this pipe organ predates that by a lot. So
automatons and things like that.
Yeah, no, but I'm seeing your point. And church organs to this day look like some kind of underwater monster that moved into a church. And yeah, it's still amazing.
It's amazing how integrated they can be with the architecture and everything. And then you sit in the middle of this big musical machine. And this is how you communicate with God is through this machine and music. But that's a good example historically of the idea of making machines that would help us exploit these sound producing natural phenomena.
Right. But who's making the modern day organs? Like I love this analogy because you could almost say like, oh yeah, your work is to make organs 2022, like bring them into modern day, metaphorically.
Yeah. To me, the only thing that like I think of as being very different the way I see it now, when I worked with Ensemble Robot, I didn't really understand the history all that much. I thought we were some vanguard. I thought we were on this cutting edge where we're using technology and combining it with music. Well, but now it's just because there was like this little incremental bump of some new technologies. Like we've been using technology all the way through. Every time new technology emerges, it seems like we sort of get some new musical possibilities show up. Even the telephone switchboard that I referred to earlier, I'll tell you a story. I'm not avoiding telling the story of Bjork, but there's a thing that is disappeared from history that's gigantic. And I was stunned that I'd never heard of it when I learned about it. So the world's first streaming music service, electronic streaming music service, launched in 1905.
Okay, I don't believe you. Go on.
It's all true, though. It is all true. And it leveraged the telephone switchboard. It used the telephone network.
Like a party line.
Well, so here's how it would work. You would write a letter and get a subscription to the Telharmonium, and they would mail you this big cone that you could put over your telephone, and then you would crank this up, talk to the operator, say, hi, I'd like to be connected to the Telharmonium. And then this weird sine wavy electronic music would come streaming out of your telephone.
Wow.
As long as you wanted.
Wow.
It was much louder. I didn't know this about old telephone systems. The first systems you see in old movies, people like yelling down the phone line,
yeah,
which I guess was a thing. There weren't any amplifiers. It was still long before the vacuum tubes had been invented.
Right. So when you yell into the horn, you were vibrating a piece of paper or whatever,
yep,
some membrane, and then that vibration would push a magnet back and forth, and the magnet moving back and forth in between a coil of wire would send an electrical impulse signal down the wire, but it wasn't amplified. So you had to scream loud enough to make
to make the speaker at the far end vibrate.
But the far end could be like a mile away, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And this was like really primitive electronics, and it would pass through all kinds of things that like might influence it. So there was all sorts of crosstalk on lines. And so what he decided to do is to make the Telharmonium was created by a man named Thaddeus Cahill. And the patents for it are amazing and gorgeous.
Nobody knows about, I've never heard of this.
Well, it was right here in New York, actually. He started it in Holyoke in Massachusetts in like a little workshop. And then he brought it and he had the New York Electric Music Company. And it was huge. It was, I'm trying to remember, 250,000 watts of musical electricity with just racks and racks of dynamos that were all spinning and generating AC electricity at different frequencies. And then a gigantic switching room full of relays and these two terrifying looking tall keyboards full of all these, stops and controls.
So they weren't just playing a record through it.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't yet. These guys had to be switching this high-powered musical electricity enough to drive 500 speakers at the ends.
But how did they switch them? By hand? Were people playing this instrument?
Yeah. So you'd push.
You'd hire a guy to play it?
You'd hire two people.
Like a crazy electronic piano telephone performance.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Well, as the more I looked into this, the more I see like they were doing media art a century ago. And there were so many weird performances. It's where the theremin comes online, the Ons Martineau, but also all sorts of other, especially in music. It was this wildly inventive time because you had a little bump of new technology. Nobody understood electricity all that well, but suddenly you could make music with electricity. And there was this big bloom of things that happened. And they were doing very media lab-like things. I'm sorry, media art-like things. All of the big hotels and restaurants, they all had to have a stream of this modern wonder, music from the Telharmonium. Mark Twain wrote about it just a little bit, but they do events like at the Waldorf Astoria. They had 2 ballrooms that were across from each other, and both of them had a stream coming in real time from the Telharmonium. And in one of them, they had an opera singer, and in one of them, they had a string quartet playing accompaniment to the pieces. They knew what the pieces would be. And people were invited to walk back and forth between the two to experience the contrast of the different. I'm like, oh, that's so media art right there.
So some guy's playing at the telephone company central office, playing this electronic piano of sorts. I just say piano, maybe pressing keys or buttons or something.
It's like a big organ console.
Okay.
And there are often 2 people playing it at once.
2 people playing it. And then across town, there would be people performing with that music.
Performing live. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, but it all sounds very recognizable if you went through this little media art boom like 10 years ago.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it makes sense now. I'm just imagining being in 1905 and thinking that it's crazy.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, the world was sort of bustling with wonders at the time. Skyscrapers were coming online. Cars, like internal combustion vehicles were.
I got a sense of this from watching Downton Abbey and seeing how when something new came online, people were like, what? I can hear voice now over a wire? And getting a feel for that.
But anyway, it's just a good example of how as new things come online. So the only real project that I want to do before, I die would be, I would like to bring the Telharmonium back to life. We don't know what he actually built. I've read the patents. I know how it works.
Okay. Tate Modern, MoMA.
Yeah.
If you're listening out there and you have $1 million and you don't know what to do with it, 5 million, just $5 mega.
$5 mega. It's actually a lot of iron and a lot of copper. And it cost about that much the first time, but we'll be doing it without child labor or horses. So
right. Okay. Crazy.
Anyway.
So all this stuff is a background, and you probably know about a lot of crazy music machines, because this is how you have to study the history of this in order to carry it forward into the future.
That's true. Although I'm usually not that interested in carrying it forward. I just get ideas and I'm excited about it.
No, but the carry forward the concept of making organs of the 21st century.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a very, very long-winded way to say that, like, what I now see when I think about working with music and technology is this is like a centuries old. It's not a vanguard. You're like getting into a vocation that's been going on for centuries. The people that you share this with aren't just people alive today. Like it's generations and generations going back, which is just lovely.
Yeah, I see how the whale is a pipe organ.
It is
resurrected
vibrating
or cut up
of air. It sounds very different.
Okay,
it's very
because of the ridges on the inside of the pipe.
Because of the ridges, and because as they rotate, they cast the sound all around the room, so the room feels like it's filled with the air, like it might be filled
that's
with
funny.
water.
So, like if you had an organ and all the pipes were spinning.
Yeah. Okay. Imagine like if you heard like a Leslie cabinet on an organ, it does that.
What's a Leslie cabinet?
Oh, a Leslie cabinet is a rotating speaker.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with rotating speakers.
You get a phasing effect.
Right. Like a Doppler kind of thing. But like when you put there's another name for that. A Hammond? No, not a Hammond. There's some other.
Well, the Hammond, that was a Leslie cabinet.
Oh, it was. Okay, I thought so.
That was the thing you could buy for your Hammond. A Hammond organ, by the way, is if you made a tiny Telharmonium, because you can amplify the little signals. Those little tone wheels spinning in the old school Hammond organs.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. So all of streaming music and all of electronic music was kind of born with this thing that has just disappeared under the sort of the dark surface of history. And it's because the end of this story isn't very good. It was possible for there to have been recordings, but as far as we can tell, there aren't any.
Nice.
There are only verbal descriptions of it.
Whoa.
And so, and we also don't, there are photos of the assembled machine, and you can see that it is not the same thing as what's in the patents.
Whoa.
So it's very mysterious in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you have to reconstruct it. You keep saying the word harmonium, and it just reminds me of like I've spent a lot of time at yoga ashrams, and they always use harmoniums, what are called harmoniums, which are like an accordion pump. In other words, some way to pump air, and then a bunch of reeds, and then what I would think of as piano keys, but a bunch of keyboard keys. Mm-hmm. And you pump with one hand usually, and you play with the other, and it seems like a mini organ kind of, except with reeds instead of pipes.
It's like half an accordion.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And my understanding about these, they're great for, singing like Jaya Ganesha and all that stuff with. But my understanding is that the Christians invented them, came to India to proselytize and teach Hindus about this great new, I guess, religion called Christianity. And they're like, dude, that is awesome. The harmonium is awesome. We'll take that. Exactly. You can keep your religion. And now they adopted it and started chanting with the harmonium.
It's funny, like the harmonium seems like an instrument that has been completely captured by Hindu culture and by like yoga and
yeah, I think Christians don't even use it anymore.
I never hear about them anymore.
Yeah, not that I know of.
It's kind of funny when something gets captured. The pedal steel guitar, when you see somebody who's really good at playing it, it looks to me like probably one of the most complex instruments a human could ever play, with the multiple pedals and so many strings and the different, anyway, there's so much going on and so much to master, but it's only in country Western music. Like it's been completely captured by one genre. You can't really.
Right. That's weird. That's the steel guitar. You lay it on your lap, but what are the pedals?
No, the lap steel. The pedal steel is a frame.
Okay.
It's about this big. I forget. I should know this off the top
that's
of my
okay.
head.
I'll throw a photo of it up.
Yeah. There's a wonderful video of Barbara Mandrell playing the pedal steel rag, and she's so damn good. I had no idea she's like a fantastic musician. Anyway, but it's funny when these things just disappear. Like that's a sound that people only put. It's like an ingredient that only goes in one dish.
Right.
You know?
I love the new genres of bands that mix sounds around. I'm thinking, obviously like any kind of DJ that's mixing different sounds, but I'm just thinking of like the first time I heard Sublime and saw them mixing ska and hip hop and reggae and punk and old covers in with like new stuff layered on top. There's probably a lot of bands that do it, but
yeah,
I love that kind of stuff.
It is. Yeah. I love that there's a time where there is almost too much material and we're trying to figure out how to cope with it.
Totally.
But anyway, I've avoided telling this story, perhaps because the story itself, I don't have a lot of like good side quests.
That's okay. Even just the instrument itself too.
So the instrument itself, Bjork. So I did my demonstration. I showed a lot of these physical electroacoustic things that I've been working on. And then that's when they told me that they were actually there recruiting. They had a new project. They were going to do a big film project. And it was going to be an IMAX film, possibly 3D IMAX, directed by Michel Gondry. And it was going to be in science museums and science centers. And it was going to be called Biophilia. And it was all about the beauty of nature and technology and music and how all these things go together. And you can use each one to learn about the others. And it all sounded wonderful. So I said, yes, absolutely. And then myself and Noah Fian both started working around the clock. They picked both of us.
One of your peers at the lab.
Yeah. And we were both developing lots of ideas and presenting them, et cetera. The big thing, though, that Bjork wanted was she loved the Foucault pendulum that you see in a science museum.
So she brought the pendulum to the project. She said, did. I love pendulums.
She did. And she wanted a big pendulum that would go back and forth. And I could see how it would look
awesome.
On stage. It'd be fantastic. The trouble that I was having was that the piece of music that she had written kept shifting time signatures.
Oh my God. You can't have that with pendulums. They're so regular.
You could have it could be kind of swinging back and forth and you're slowly like inserting all these different things in the path of the pendulum. But when I would picture it, it didn't seem like it would feel convincing. It would feel like we had just invented an incredibly complicated way to do
I
something.
guess if you have a bunch of pendulums all with different length strings, so they had different periods, you could cleverly switch time signatures. It just seems like unnecessarily complicated, but it could be done.
Well, this is what I ended up doing.
Okay.
I designed a really large pendulum ring that she could walk around through, and they'd be swinging, and she could walk in and out of them. And as they swung through the bottom, they might rotate to change which string is being played.
So instead of a big long line of swinging things, it was just a big long line circled on itself.
Yes. And the idea was that we would shoot this at this big abandoned power station up near Reykjavik. But the trouble was that Michel Gondry he was kind of, I shouldn't speak for him. He was overcommitted in a way that he did not expect. He had been called in to reshoot everything in a film to make it into a 3D film after it was in the can. And he couldn't really protect himself from this. These people had burned through several directors already.
So he got called off your project?
Well, so he was not available. And so I kept telling Bjork that this thing would only work for a certain number of weeks and it could never be portable. And then she called me up and she's like, so how are we going to take this on tour? And I'm like, she was way ahead because she was already planning. I was perpetually out of the loop.
So she loved it. She wanted to take it with her.
She loved it. She wanted to do this on the next tour. And then there were going to be all these other components. She said that she would have to simplify, not do the film, and instead have a suite of iPad apps and educational curriculum that went along with biophilia and a new album and a tour.
But biophilia came out, right? That's an album.
It did.
Yeah,
Well, that's where all that ended up. So it didn't become the film. It became a whole bunch of other.
But isn't it like a 16 channel album or something like that?
There might be a 16 channel album.
I thought because I went to Stanford's Computer Music Research Institute, and there was like a special room with special speakers, and they were playing Bjork. I thought it was biophilia.
Oh, that may have been
A different album.
The Black Lake song. But yeah, so I pitched and developed prototypes for a whole lot of different instruments, but the one that ended up going in there were the gravity harps. I ended up reducing it down to just 4 of them with these cylindrical harps on the end that would swing up and they'd rotate into another position. They'd come down and they'd strike. And in doing it this way, they would just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 through their naders one way and then back this way. And in doing so, they could switch into any time signature because they were just going to boom, 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 and they were computer controlled. And all of this, I'd never done any kind of large project. I'd never taken anything on tour.
But you had these robotic instruments in the scene and you were working on those. They just weren't as big.
They weren't as big.
Okay.
They weren't as complex.
Okay.
They weren't as high quality.
Okay.
And you didn't have to set them up to run night after night after night.
Right.
It would just be 2 or 3 times a year with Ensemble Robot. We'd have to get things running.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was maybe the hardest thing I've ever done, just because I'd never done that kind of work before or on that scale or supported things or had to manage a project full of so many people. In the end, it was wonderful, wonderful experience, even though I wondered if I would die doing it a few times. And so wonderful years later, they were in the lobby at MoMA for about 4 months, which was great. It's my favorite museum lobby in the world. So they were not made to run all day. So I had to keep going up and visiting from time to time to figure out what was going wrong. Really, really prosaic things. A cable, a loose bolt, things like that.
Yeah, it's hard to deploy mechanical art. And I often make everything that, if I'm deploying, thousands of copies of something, I often have to deploy it with as few moving parts as possible. I try to make nothing be moving if I can. Nice. And did you go out for the shows?
Oh, I was working. I saw every show because I was running the gravity harps right next to it.
What a great experience.
Yeah. It's fun going out on tour with Bjork.
Yeah.
And she's wonderful to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And she was in a punk band too when she was younger. I've seen videos of her as
Oh
a
my God.
teenager.
Even as a teenager, it was amazing how she could sing.
So weird to watch her. It's like, it's not even that her voice was good. I mean, of course it was, but it was just that she brought the presence.
Yeah. Yeah. It was weird. Like she was already clearly like a pop star level of ability and charisma.
The charisma was always there.
And also just her weirdness and her like sort of fearlessness. Very interesting to see her on tour because there would be different types of adversity happening in the different shows and things that weren't expected. And to watch her just always improvise right through it.
She rolled with it.
Yeah, she would roll with every sort of thing that possibly went wrong on stage. And so you wouldn't even know if you hadn't seen the show 40 times.
Right. And you've made a lot of other instruments. One that comes to mind is really visual, which is one where you shoot fire through tubes. I don't even know how it works.
Oh, yeah.
Is that true that you made something like that?
Yes. That's that's a pyrophone. I didn't invent it, but I saw some photos of a pyrophone from 1888, which again, so gaslight technology had recently come online in this city in Belgium, and somebody decided to make a flame organ, and they had figured out an interesting way to do it, where you would have a long tube, and you would have 5 or 6 little flexible hoses, and each had a little tiny flame on them. When you pulled them together, they made a big flame. And if the flame was in just the right nodal position inside the tube, it would.
Why does lighting a gas flame in a tube resonate to make a sound wave?
Well, you can think of it a little bit like the reed in a saxophone. So what happens is you pull it into that spot, air is flowing through the tube from the bottom. And as the air passes this flame and it gets to a certain size, the flame will vibrate and it's full of its own sort of vibrations, but it doesn't vibrate without the tube around it. It wouldn't lock into a particular frequency.
So the flame is some kind of, I don't know,
the flame
resonator.
Yeah, it's like the flame is an oscillator.
Oscillator,
that
thank
is not pinned to any particular frequency.
Right.
And so you never really
so it's not a predictable sound.
Not predictable. And like you sometimes you might hear white noise with a flame or something like that.
So could we make a chimney the right way so that a fireplace makes a sound?
Yes, you absolutely could.
Nice.
But there's something about putting the flame in just the right spot. And so yeah, I had to assemble. I took a sponsorship from Stella Artois to create 4 instruments using their chalice. And I think what they were picturing was like, here it is with chopsticks tapping on it or things like that. And I made 4 incredibly ambitious, like one of them is a gigantic sort of orrery with 15 concentric gears that operate 5 floating robot arms that play a harp in the center. And there's a pyrophone that sort of plays music this way. I didn't realize the people at the ad agency between myself and Stella had started referring to me as Kurtz from Apocalypse Now or from Heart of Darkness, who the man who's gone so dangerously far off mission that they have to go send somebody in to stop him. But pieces turned out nice in the end, and everybody was pretty happy. So cool. there were a bunch of them. One of them was the very typical one that you would expect, which was just some felt piano hammers that would strike. I chopped their chalices down and tuned them to different pitches.
So typical.
Like you do. And I mixed them in with a bunch of steel bells. And they were really, really nice. The glass bells and steel bells together, actually. The timbres sounded beautiful. There's one of them that's over here where there are a bunch of concentric rings of horsehair, a big wheel with lines of horsehair sort of stretched through them. As those rotate, and in the center, there'd be 6 tuned glass bells rotating in the opposite direction that could be sort of extended by little motors to press against the horsehair so you can bow it. So you've got 18 pitches, and you can play this with a keyboard. And I wanted to get 4 separate sounds that were very expressive and could together create music that you might want to hear, because it's one of my It's one of my fake rules. I've got a bunch of fake rules.
You got to tell me what they are. Do you need a break to get water or anything?
I probably do because I'm starting to cough a lot.
Yeah, let's take a break to get water.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. It's just on my mind to talk about.
And we're back.
And we're back. Hello. And at some point, you and I both came out of the maker movement very much.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
The maker movement was like a scene where all of a sudden the crazy stuff that I wanted to do mattered to people. And even if it didn't have a specific use, like I think they called it technology on your time at first at Make Magazine. I didn't really love that phrasing, but at least it showed you that it wasn't about someone paying you to make technology. It was you making technology whenever you wanted to, for whatever reason you wanted to do it. So it at least hinted in the right direction, which is that you can make stuff, and not just technology, but you can make stuff, you can sew stuff, you can cook stuff, you can garden stuff, you can make circuits and obviously code and things like that, and robots that are whimsical, that are for fun, that you can show each other, that don't have a commercial application, that don't have any application. Sometimes you wouldn't even call it art. I mean, usually at least it should be art. No, this is just a pumpkin, remote control pumpkin. Like that's not even art. It's just goofy.
It's just a project.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I loved a lot of that. I think that there were so many undercurrents that lifted all of that up at the time. There was an anti-corporate feeling going on, which I'm still fine with myself, that the idea was like, why should corporations and professional engineers be the only ones who have the power to create these things?
Well, and they are, but even the professional engineers don't have the power to direct what things are created because their time is soaked up by the corporate corporation that employs them. And it all makes sense. I mean, the economy has to work in some sense, and I get it, but it seems like a misallocation of all the potential creativity to not have at least a 10% time or maybe all the time where we work on this kind of stuff. And the maker movement seemed to give a voice to this possibility.
Yeah, I recently went back to Chico McMurtry's workshop with his Amorphic Robot Works. I worked with him 22 years ago, or 20 perhaps, out in San Francisco. I was trying to learn he built large and small robotic performances. They were like all made out of steel and roughly welded, and a lot of them were pneumatic and noisy and interesting. And you couldn't buy normal like maker computational stuff. So we were buying like old industrial and military surplus for a lot of the equipment, like a bunch of large rack mount computers with like back planes. And
so you're saying this is pre-maker movement, so you couldn't use Arduinos, so you're using some crazy military stuff.
We were using stuff that just it always felt to me vaguely like we didn't want to get caught, like we could get in trouble for seeking this stuff out and buying it and building weird stuff out of it. It all felt very sort of subversive in a way. And so when the maker movement came around to sort of try to put that stuff into everybody's hands, I loved the feeling of it quite a bit.
It did feel crazy to use a microcontroller for something that wasn't an industrial application, wasn't a military application. And you're right, when the maker movement happened, it kind of normalized the use of these tiny computers that are in all of our electronics. And repurposing them, not just to run your microwave, but to make the remote control pumpkin, to make the hat that displays the color of your emotional state based on your skin conductance, to mix and match all these. It's almost, I would almost say it's not art. I mean, of course it's art, but it's just this mass expression that sometimes didn't even have a purpose. Whereas I would, sure, some artists out there, some art philosophers out there will tell me, oh, art doesn't always have a purpose, but like, so fine. But I would think of like art as having some kind of meaning or purpose or trying to move you. Whereas maker projects, sometimes yes, sometimes no, maybe you laugh, whatever.
Yeah, I always figure that if it's art to anybody, then we can call it art. But then you're into a much more difficult conversation of whether it's good art. So maybe it's fine to just call it a project and not get into that.
Well, having something be a project is so much more approachable, right? Are you making art? And art should be approachable. So like My 6-year-old daughter thinks art's very approachable. She'll just make it and doesn't have any sense of if it should be a certain way. She just makes it. That's beautiful. But I feel like a project, everyone knows you can work on a project. You're just working on a project.
You don't need permission to work on a project.
I love it.
And before the Arduino was the thing that really kicked it off. Before that, there were all these little controllers. Like there's the basic stamp, which was the fundamental one. There were these gum sticks controllers. A lot of people were trying to be the Arduino, but the Arduino took off because it was open source enough and it had a big community connected to it.
Yeah.
And that community became the big thing. Like now you have a microcontroller with a community on it.
Yeah.
And now you suddenly have a maker movement. Even if people aren't using the Arduino in particular, it just became one of these centers of gravity. There was a downside built into this that I think has sort of taken down the maker movement.
Yeah. What do you think happened?
Well, what I think happened is it said, you don't need to understand what the engineers understand to be able to do this stuff. You can get a product like an Arduino and you can learn how to do some basic things, and you can go to a couple of these different companies and they package this stuff and they show it like a kit, like you.
Or even a microbit, not an Arduino maybe. Or
you download a thing and you paste it into here and it goes. There was a lot of stuff about getting around needing to understand how it worked.
Yeah. Which is essential to meeting people at the ground floor at some level so they could participate.
And it's so good. And it brought a lot of people. There's a lot of people who started there and they went off in like very far in different directions.
Yeah.
So I think it's really good. But there was a bit of a revolution back then, kind of at the intersection of the technical and the creative. And there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in all this new, I'm slaughtering this metaphor with the revolution and low-hanging fruit, but there was like, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, a lot of things that you might be able to go and do, just exciting new possibilities that you could get into. But as 20 years later, a lot of those, we don't want to keep seeing the same ones over and over again. A lot of what was doable with the new technologies has sort of been done. A lot of that stuff has now, it's not special. Like you'll learn that as the basics in some class that you might take in a regular art or design school. And a lot of it has been productized in a way, which is good and bad. But the productizing of it means that you don't necessarily, it's productized in ways that allow you to do some things, make some things happen without learning how it works.
So you're saying the maker movement has been stymied by things being too prepackaged so that you can't actually span the space of creative possibilities. So people have already done all the things that you can do with the prepackaged version of the complex, simplified complex tools that they currently have.
If I wasn't verbose, I would have said that.
I have this theory about the maker movement that people put a lot of hope in a movement, whether it's a political revolution or whether it's a movement for rights or for the environment, or whether it's a movement, like a new, even if it's like just a new art form or a new way of making food or something. In this case, the maker movement, people put a lot of hope in it, and that's great. And I don't think people have a good sense of how what happens after the middle of a movement. There's the beginning of a movement and then it starts happening and it's very exciting. And then what happens from there? Like, what's the best case outcome, right? Well, I think what happens with a lot of movements are they achieve their goal or they don't. And I feel like the maker movement achieved its goal, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it did, because what happened was we said, hey, more people should be making things. The whole maker movement said that. And then society responded, I think, saying, yeah, okay, great. And even schools adopted that as an institution. Like project-based learning is very common now. It didn't used to be. And maker spaces, or the spirit of making at some level, has been adopted by a lot of institutions like public schools, for example. And as it was adopted, it kind of placated some of the spirit, and with a mass adoption comes some dulling of the sharpness of the beauty of the maker spirit. And so now it's succeeded, it infused into society, and now we have, the product that my company makes, like Makey Makey, and then we have like like coding languages like Scratch, which I worked on a team to make, and then all the other products like Arduino and Strawbees and Microbit and, on and on. And they have been adopted by schools. And with that comes a transfer of something brand new and exciting to something that's part of society. Hey, we won, right? But what happened to all the aliveness and all the excitement? It's still there. Some kids are really excited to do some project-based learning in schools. They didn't used to be able to do this kind of stuff. So I think the movement succeeded, but a successful movement doesn't always feel the way that you would have wanted it to.
That's really interesting. It's funny because I never think of the makey in that way or as being such an intrinsic part of that. I think you put it very well a long time ago where you told me, it comes from that, but I don't think it suffers from the limitations that other things did. Because you said, oh, it's not about teaching electronics. It's a thing that turns the whole world into a toy.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's so brilliant. And that still works as well today as it ever did.
Well, I really believe in this world as construction kit concept. And I love making a kit where not everything you need comes in the box. So most kits would have everything you needed, or it would say, okay, but go get water and a paper towel and some aluminum foil. So I love making kits where you've got some stuff in the box and then it says, now go out and get anything in the world, where anything can't always be literally anything, but it should be almost anything as much as possible. And then modify the world with this or plug the world into this, where the world really means any object from your everyday life, from nature. And to me, that's so exciting because like if a kit had an ego, this would be turning that ego inside out a little bit and saying, it's not about me. The kit is saying, I don't care about myself. I care about the world you live in. And don't look at me. The kit's not what's cool. You live in this beautifully manifested, creviced and detailed and textured world. And you can go out and look at something in front of you, like the piece of wood that's on this table. And you can say, what are the properties of this? Well, this kit is, the makey kit senses electrical conductivity. It lets you hook up alligator clips to an object. And if that object is conductive, you can then touch that object. The makey will sense that you've touched the object, and then it'll press a keyboard on your computer for you. And then the computer can play a sound on a piano, like a digital piano, or make a guy jump in a video game, or take a picture with a camera, whatever a computer can do, right? But so what you've done is you've now turned the person's eyes using the kit into resistance and conductivity seeking mentality. So you go around with this makey, it's like a magnifying glass for what's conductive around me. And not only what's conductive, which by the way, things are conductive people don't know about, like blades of grass are conductive. As long as you set the bar of conductivity low enough where conductive at all, can electrons move through it at all? With the air, it's very, very hard to push electrons through the air. So the air with a makey would not be conductive. But a banana famously is, and human body is, it doesn't have to be metal. It doesn't have to be copper. It doesn't have to be, like salty water, even just like plain water. With just, like tap water, for example, could work. And even wood, if there's some moisture in it from the environment, depending on if you're in Hawaii, versus in a room with a humidifier or in a desert, right? Mm-hmm. So it turns this kit, the makey, for example, is now a magnifying glass or a lens onto the world that says what is conductive around me. And not only is it a lens, it's also a block, because it not only says what's conductive around me, it says I should make something with what's around me. So the best part of blocks, blocks come in a box and you build something with them. And you learn stuff about architecture and gravity, and it's beautiful. Nothing against blocks, but I want to take the best part of blocks, which is that you can mix them and make something, and take the best part of a lens, which is that you can look at the world around you and say, look at the world around you and make something with it. Mm-hmm. And so all of the kits I make, makey being one example of, have this world as construction kit property that I hope makes people, as they practice with it, start to look out onto the world and say, hey, this world, it's not fixed. I can make something out of it. And not only can I've practiced hundreds or thousands of times making little things with all these little kits that allow me to look through the lens of the sensor that's being used and see it as something that it could be, not for what it is already.
That is such a good explanation. And I love this idea of the lens, because I sometimes am working with a new area and I'm like, oh, There are all these different types of lenses through which you can see most of the world. Conductivity is not one I'd ever really thought of before, but that's fascinating. It's also interesting how everything is fascinating when you get it under the right lens.
You just have to put the right box around it or look at it with the right frame of reference.
I think the thing that we're talking about here in many ways is discovery and the experience of discovery.
Yes.
And I think that's what I see so much less of now in the maker movement because it was successful. So many of the things that could be discovered and uncovered within that framework, a lot of them are kind of done. Like we've seen a lot of them.
But there's capital D discovery and there's little d.
Oh, but I think with the makey, that's about you and the world and discovery and not about learning how to make a project with a laser cutter or a 3D printer.
That's why I wrote an essay called like the maker movement is not about 3D printers. And it's exactly this problem. I mean, 3D printers are amazing. Laser cutters are amazing. Drones are amazing. Robots are amazing. But as like Mitch Resnick would say, if your creative platform, if your creative scenario doesn't have wide walls, it's great if it has a low floor so anyone can get started. It's great if it has a high ceiling so you can do complex stuff. And there's a trade-off sometimes between the lowness of the floor and the highness of the ceiling and all that. But we really need to be looking at the wideness of the walls because you have to be able to do a variety of things with it because you have to find something you're passionate about that you can do because everybody has different passions. So a good creative tool allows you to make a breadth of things. Photoshop lets you throw heads on things, but also lets you make beautiful nature landscapes, and everyone wants to do something different.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Sometimes I see a kit and I'm like, oh, that's brilliant because it's so open-ended. Or I'm like, oh, that looks like you can make about 10 kinds of things with that. And now what? But with the maker movement, I don't really know what comes next, but I have trouble hiring people for my studio because I find people come in and they know how to use these tools. They've been trained to use a 3D printer and a bunch of other fairly typical things, and maybe some web frameworks and stuff like that. But they don't understand how electricity works, and they don't understand fields and forces. They can't do algebra or trigonometry. They can't do, there's just a lot of things. They don't understand, they know the names of algorithms, but they don't know how they work.
See, I thought you were going to say, you kind of did say this, but I thought you were going to say that they don't know how to hook things up backwards and look under the hood of things and understand. But you were saying that kind of like, how does electricity really work? So is this why you're running a class? Because I didn't understand, there seemed to be no practical, you're not going to make a lot of money from running a class. You're not. And does your class have a name?
Oh, it's just called Discovery-Oriented Design.
I love that. Okay, I didn't know that name. And you were just now talking about the discovery.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's the process that I'm familiar with doing here in the studio is this endless prototyping. We'll do, instead of what people call rapid prototyping, where you're familiar with that, that's usually about spending as little time as possible building prototypes. But prolific prototyping is about prototyping pretty much nonstop.
Is this your word?
Yeah. Cool. This is where I was trying to describe why what I've learned to do in unfamiliar spaces is really different. That you will build, 95% of the stuff that you have built and created in the process doesn't show up in your finished project. And perhaps, even less than that shows up in it. Because it's kind of relentless. I should take more photos of the processes, but mostly when I go back and I look at all the photo documentation of a large project, what I mostly feel is exhausted. I'm like, I can't believe we built so many prototypes and tests all the way along. But it's that process of discovery. And I love it. I think it's fascinating. And it's what drew me into the maker movement.
I think that's what the maker movement spirit was about. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to see what happens next because there's a lot of curriculums that are teaching this at like a college or graduate level, teaching the sort of maker movement ideals. But now to me, it sort of feels like you just went to RTFM University or something. I want people who understand the underlying theory, because when you understand, there are some types of knowledge that are like sort of so empowering that they are like these glasses that you put on and now you see the world differently.
What you're talking about does seem like an alchemy. It does seem like a forbidden, semi-forbidden knowledge. It does seem like a under the cover of how the universe itself works, like peeling, if we are in a simulation, or even if we're not, the universe still has rules that it runs by.
Right.
So either way, peeling up the layer of how that works and looking underneath, which is what real scientists do, which is what, engineers / scientists who are discovering new things and not just repeating experiments, which is also important, but this is what they do. They discover, they try to imagine how something might work and uncover some new theory. And sometimes it's in art or design, it's not a new theory of how the universe works. It's just a realization that fire in a tube makes an interesting sound, but
I should take a break.
Oh, okay, sure.
Just a quick note that we had turned off the heater in the studio and it had gotten into the 50s in the studio, so we were really cold. Just took a quick break to warm up.
My mind.
Then we can warm back up.
Yes, we can warm back up.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, so are you a runner?
I run every day, like 5K.
Every day?
Almost every day.
That's
And
fantastic.
I didn't do it today. I actually kind of did, actually.
Are you heel to toe or midfoot or?
I learned like most people to run on my heel because shoes are higher on the back and lower in the front, and they encourage you to hit on your heel. And people are taught to run on their heel now, and they have so much cushioning in them that you can hit on your heel. If you ever went, certainly on a sidewalk, and started to run barefoot, without shoes at all, without cushioning, you would not strike on your heel.
No way.
And so people never did in history until the advent of cushioned shoes with a high heel.
Oh, no, that totally makes sense. When I was really learning as an adult to like really run some distances, it wasn't until I switched to running on my toes. And I started to do this in Bali. I went there where I'd run every day. And that's when there's a thing that happens where you can just feel that this is how it all evolved. You feel the lines of all the muscles and joints lining up.
Yeah.
And like the power and the simplicity of it. And you're like, oh, that's the spot. That's exactly how it's done. And you do it on your toes.
Yeah, the foot's like this, like, I don't know, it's so much more than this, but it's a little spring, and you're supposed to hit midfoot, not on your toes, but midfoot strike. And
yeah, I always run on the pads of my feet.
Yeah, exactly.
That always, not on your toes. That's for ballerinas.
And I learned how, like when I was first, I was like, how do you run not on your heel? I saw this tutorial and it says like, well, just run in place or jump up and down in place. You're not going to jump on your heels or run in place on your heels. So you'll naturally use your toes and then lean forward a little when you go for a jog. And then you can start to strike midfoot. And it takes a long time to learn, ultimately to transition fully.
Makes sense.
But you just learned that way right away.
Well,
it's natural for you.
I never in my adulthood, even when I'm very fit, have I been lean enough, or light enough, I should say, to go heel to toe.
Okay.
It's just, I've had doctors in the past tell me, they're like, you shouldn't run.
Yeah. It just didn't feel good to you to run on your
above a certain weight. You're just,
okay.
They suggest don't even do it. But I did for a long time.
Yeah.
I should restart. Anyway.
Okay.
So
you are launching this class, probably in 2023.
That's the plan.
And it has a great name and it's a great idea. So tell us about it.
Sure. The class is called Discovery-Oriented Design, and we'll see if I can really do it. The way I'd love to do it is 40 hours a week. It's about 1,200 hours of material, and this has been why I've been in some long conversations with a large number of people about who might actually have the time and the space and the money to afford something like this. What I want to teach is twofold. It's about how you learn to create things that you have no idea how to make, even very challenging things technologically. And so on one fork of this, it's a lot of the prototyping that we've been talking about, but you'll learn to work with different materials. You'll learn to work with all the types of hand tools. Can you use a chisel well? Can you then use machine tools in a shop? Can you use a manual lathe? And then getting into the CNC tools. And if you go down this path where you've been handling these materials sort of manually and then with regular power tools, by the time you get to using a CNC router, you understand so much more intuitively what is going to work or not work with slicing big bits of wood or aluminum.
Right. Use the tools by hand first, and then CNC means computer numeric control. So a computer controlled version of that same tool. And you have this experience of holding the tool in your hand, using it over and over again. So when you tell the computer to use it, you have some sense of what that might do.
Yes. And even though we now have these fancy computer controlled tools, there are plenty of times, if you're good at what you're doing, when the hand tools are the appropriate tools to use for this process or for this particular problem or task. So that's sort of down one path where you end up learning about materials, generations of the different tools and machines that you might use. And then that goes into working with mechanisms, understanding gears and belts and pulleys and like power transmission things, and also about the way mechanical movements and their various forms. But there'd be a whole other path, number two, and I think that this is what it really takes, which sort of looks like the freshman content of a bunch of different technical fields. So,
Wait, are you starting at university? I mean, this seems like a lot of material.
It is a lot of material.
Yeah.
It would be, now I'd love to do this within a university and you do a master's degree program in this.
Maybe you should start a new department somewhere.
Well, what I found from speaking with all my academic friends is that doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. It has to be somewhere crazy. Arizona State University has a pretty crazy president. You know, like you got to find the right person.
Oh, I just missed the ship that MIT has a new design school.
Oh, cool.
So exciting. But everybody was excited by it. And there are a lot more people who are close to it. The director of it asked me to submit a proposal.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I did, but it's on a stack of like 500 other proposals.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, so I haven't heard back.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other side of this is something that people don't learn when they do these sort of design and technology or maker sort of programs. I would do a full review of the algebra. How do you work with equations like really well and learn how to solve them and learn how to rearrange and manipulate them? Trigonometry, analytic geometry, a bit of probability and combinatorics, things like that, so that people can rearrange these things in their minds. I have my own personal theory of intelligence at the moment is about what is in your model of the world and what can you do with that model? How can you turn it around and connect things? And so a lot of this would really be about changing people's brains and making them able to do things, to see things, and to solve things that they couldn't have done before.
Is some of this influenced by your physics background?
That's been incredibly helpful to me that I was not naturally good at math, but I've had so much practice at certain types of it. I was able to avoid getting good at CAD for a long time because I could do it all on paper with trigonometry and with analytic geometry. So there's a lot of that, and then a bunch of basic physics that I would understand. I've hired people who sold themselves as great electrical engineers, but they were making mistakes that made it clear they didn't really understand what electricity was. They understood how to stick things on a breadboard. But like you were talking about conductivity and having a lens for that. But to understand all the basic sort of forces and fields and the math behind them, it's important to me that people be able to pick up a pencil and understand where do the field lines go when you change the shape.
So you're like creating hackers, or just it's called discovery-oriented design?
It's just, yeah. And after that, I'd love to go into a lot of basic algorithms so that you could learn to see the world as algorithms. Because when you put that lens on things, this morning I ran off to Whole Foods and I was trying to figure out if I should get into their like 11 items or less line. And figuring that out means understanding how their algorithm works for how they're calling people at the front. Once you start thinking in algorithms, you start to see them everywhere. And so I'd love to, well, the projects for this class, I think, would be a lot of the real fun. Create social algorithms that are spread out across a space, or to create machines that solve problems. How about a machine that converts hexadecimal into base 10 numbers, where you sort of dial them up on one side and they show
Like
up.
a mechanical machine.
A mechanical machine. Or a flow chart for playing blackjack, and then a flow chart for card counting blackjack. Those are algorithms. When you play card games are algorithms. Like so many things that we do are algorithms. And it's increasingly a big part of our world. I'd love to do a big segment. All the best projects in the class are really having to do with algorithms.
So it's kind of a master class for inventing. Is it for inventing the future? Is it for, what is it? What do you hope people?
For designers and architects and artists, and for a new sort of designer and architect and artist who sees these particular areas not as somebody else's business and I don't have permission to go there. To really have permission to do it, unfortunately, it's not so much about permission, it's that you really need to understand and have insight into these things.
So you're going to have training. So everyone you mentioned were fields that aren't especially quantitative. Of course, architecture has some quantitative stuff.
Well, I don't think engineers would need to take this. However, if you were an engineer in some field and you were taking this course, you might still encounter a lot of things that you wouldn't have otherwise. For instance, we will get into the basics of electricity, like how does the physics of electricity and magnetism lead to understanding analog circuits?
So unless you're a physics major or maybe electrical engineer, you wouldn't have encountered that.
You wouldn't have. But all of this stuff is stuff that you would encounter in the freshman class. Like none of this stuff is actually super advanced or scary.
And there's not really this group of things isn't being taught by anybody. This is like, not yet. This is like, it's like hand tools and computer controlled tools and mechanisms. I mean, each of these is and algorithms and also design philosophy, right? And reckless or reckless imagining. You're going to teach these things too, right? Reckless fantasizing.
Yeah, but there's going to be an awful lot of now come up with your own project involved with go out and find algorithms in the world.
And once someone comes through your class, what will they be able to do at the end? Like
they'll be able
what kind of job would someone get, or what kind of things would people create? Or
they'd be able to, this would be best for running your own studio, but now you would be able to create things that you absolutely don't know how to make at the beginning of the project. You can jump into the deep end over and over again in a lot of new areas.
So does it make somebody a master maker or something like that?
I think there's sort of a meta thing. So there's like, I feel like there's specialists, which is like learning to be it's like a mouse that is trained to run a very specific maze. And you know, all the little corners, all the decisions, you can learn to do it very quickly. And it's a fantastic thing to be. It's great to have the skills of a specialist, even if it's not what you do. And then there's more of a generalist, which is somebody who has a lot of fortitude as this mouse in the maze to kind of wander around for a long time and sort of put a lot of energy and effort into it.
So you want to teach people to be generalists?
I actually don't.
Okay.
I want to teach them to be something else.
Those are two things, but neither.
I'm going to call this a prototyper, but it could be all sorts of things. I don't have a proper term.
But how does it relate to the specialist and the generalist?
I'll tell you.
Oh, sorry.
The prototyper mouse can run unfamiliar mazes quickly, and that's the difference. The specialist mouse only knows a particular type of maze. The generalist can't do it quickly. The prototyper can do unfamiliar mazes quickly. So unfamiliar types of problems. And this is just stuff that me trying to share what I've learned in the past 12 years. I do design-wise all kinds of things. I do set design, worked on products, done fine arts work, done lots of design, created musical instruments of various types. And I tend to end up doing them in a very large and ambitious way, which is somehow silly. It wasn't intended to be my specialty. I just made my first game, actually. It's the world's most complex arcade game. It's a 5-person pinball game that explains economic concepts.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up because this is one of my favorite projects. I saw it online and it looked to me like as if you had cut the back off of 5 pinball machines, not saying that's what you did,
No.
and then you glued all of them together so that it was almost like 5 people were playing pinball at once. But will you explain what this thing actually is?
Sure. So the game is called Dual Coincidence. And it explains the economic concept of the dual coincidence of wants, which was I think it's not a very true explanation for how barter works. Remember we were learning about barter as a kid, and you're like, what? So I go down to the square and I'm like, I've got 2 fishes and I want 3 fuzzy sweaters. Like, how do those 2 people find each other? And the way this would really work in bartering societies is that exchange would happen over a long period of time amongst people who know and trust each other. So the way it would really work is, do you remember 3 years ago when you were hungry and I gave you those fishes? Well, I know that you're spinning lots of wool and I need wool for sweaters. And it would go back and forth like this. We all do still barter. We're like, we'll go out to dinner. And I'm like, I'll get it this time or you'll get it next time. And there's sort of an understanding that over time, you both feel things work out close enough to even that everyone's pretty much at peace with it.
Yeah.
You can't do that with strangers. You can't do that in a society that is scaled way up and everyone's a stranger. But the dual coincidence of wants is based on the idea that like you'd have to show up somewhere and you can't make an exchange unless somebody's looking for something that somebody else wants, something that you might happen to have. So the game itself, you could write that on a poster. You could make a touchscreen interactive about that, but I wanted people to experience it. So I designed these 5 separate pinball games. Everybody is producing stuff as they're creating these games. In my original design, there was like a shoemaker, somebody who fixes roofs, somebody who makes medicine, and you're all like in a little village. And if you don't have stuff from everybody, then you're not able to proceed and your own gameplay is impaired. And so you have to stop what you're doing and make an exchange with somebody out of the goods that you have created yourself. And you'd be like, Jay, I need some corn. And you'd be like, well, I don't need any shoes. And then soon you do need shoes. And now we can do this exchange and interaction. And so everybody's sort of dividing their time between trying to be productive and trading when they need to. So that's how this game works. And I decided to make the productive side of each game a pinball machine because everybody knows how to play pinball, even if they've never played it before. Like, it's kind of obvious. You see you've got the 2 paddles. Anyway, so there's a big exchange matrix in the center that represents the economy. And so you accumulate points as balls that stack up in the game. And then the balls are exchanged through the exchange matrix in the center. When you trade them. And the thing that you learn in the end, more than anything, is that while it feels like you're all competing against each other and trying to get higher scores, if you don't all collaborate as generously and as responsively as possible, then you're all not doing as well as you could.
Nice.
Yeah.
It really has a beauty to it because you just don't see pinball machines multi pinball machine. It reminded me of the busicle. Like,
oh, I missed the busicle.
Like 5 bicycles that everybody rides facing each other and somehow you go for it. It seemed like that, but with pinball machines. 5 pinball machines. I don't know how many, but
it's 5.
And yeah, it's making a star and you're all facing each other. And, I didn't know about the details that you just explained, but it just no matter how it worked, it seemed like a winner to have 5 pinball machines all splooged together.
Well, I love it. And the games are interconnected. And then you have to talk to people and sometimes to strangers. And I had a lot of fun putting that one together because it's all reflective steel and shiny glass and white light and stuff. I told the client, the Central Bank of Mexico, they were like, well, what is the aesthetic of this and how will it fit in with our new museum? And I said, the aesthetic is a math rock musical version of 2001: A Space Odyssey starring both David Bowie and cocaine. There was a long pause and they said, okay. I was like, all right. If you tell people that you're an artist, you get all kinds of latitude. It's one of the good things about it.
Yeah, true.
But I use this as an example. I've never designed a game before. I've certainly never designed arcade games before. But the reason I can do this is because I understand enough about the fundamentals of what electricity is and how it works to be able to make something this complicated. We had the problem with these long tubes. Noah Votter came down here. We were working on this. It was a lot of fun.
So another colleague from Media Lab.
Yeah. we had these long tubes and the balls would accumulate in the tubes, and we needed to knock the bottom of the tube. We needed a way to knock the top one out. And it turns out this is a physics problem. And depending upon how many you had in the tube, it affected things. But there's gravitational potential energy. You need at least that much. And then there's the energy needed to make the ball spin.
You hit the first ball and it hits all the other balls. And then finally the last ball launches off.
It does, but
that's what you'd like.
It doesn't work automatically.
Got it.
But also how much energy.
Yeah.
So how big a coil, how short a period of time, how much voltage on the other side.
Right, because you wanted to have resources, not just one pinball, but a set of pinballs that acted like resources in the game.
Yeah. So the number would change. But because Noah's actually very good at like mathematically modeling things too. So
Noah's a mad scientist for sure.
Noah's a mad scientist.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful to be working with somebody who also understands this stuff, where we could take it all, turn it all into numbers, and then get solutions this way, bring that back into prototypes, find out how close we were. But if I didn't understand this stuff, if I didn't know theory, I couldn't build stuff like this.
Yeah.
Similarly, a comfort level with making algorithms. There's so many there's 17 small computers in this system, almost 1,000 channels of lighting. I forget how many, hundreds of sensors, hundreds of actuators. And there are all these algorithms involved in the game. And the individual games are running algorithms because you can't predict what the player will do. And so there's sets of rules, but the rules all interact with each other. And then there's time involved. I have so many gigantic newspaper size diagrams, just flowcharts about what happens in all the algorithms. And I'm not any kind of like super genius or anything like that. I've just done a ton of stuff like this. And now I feel like I can solve problems by creating large, complex algorithms that embody the problem. It's one of those fun things that happens. We often think of the problem and the solution as somehow being opposing forces. And I've learned over all this time, especially with the work with algorithms, that a lot of times a sufficiently detailed and correct description of the problem is the same thing as the solution.
Nice.
So by the time I had actually figured out how this game would inevitably work with 5 players, I actually had almost the entire game algorithm worked out and figured out.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the stuff that you're teaching in the class and a lot of stuff you do in your work has to do with finding out the ground truth underneath the matrix of how reality works so that you can implement things. And this actually reminds me of one other thing that I saw you doing, which is trying to understand the alt-right in the political spectrum. And so rather than reading about them, or rather than like just wondering about them, you actually went into some of their message boards to try to understand what they were talking about. Is that what happened?
It sort of, before there was an alt-right, way back in 2008, I was starting to see all this stuff showing up, just bubbling up, all this weird conspiracy stuff, and also a lot of nasty racist stuff, which I was less concerned about. I think the thing that I was wondering was, I grew up very much politically on the left, and I was wondering, we dismiss a lot of what goes on as just being like, well, they're just racist, and that's what's going on. And I was
right, but that's not a full explanation.
That's not a full explanation.
It might be true, or it might not be true. Probably it is, but it's not full.
I don't know what was true. The thing that I started engaging with people who believed a lot of, first of all, with flat earthers, because I couldn't imagine, like, I was framing the problem as if, have you simply not been exposed to the correct information?
Right, but most people would just dismiss a flat earther, wouldn't they? They wouldn't say, oh, how does a flat earther work? They'd say, well, that's dumb, and move on, right?
Yeah. Or
you're saying, actually, like with the electricity, actually, how does the flat earther work?
Well, yeah.
And so you actually went to...
I started to see this. I was seeing this stuff percolating up, and I was like, oh, this stuff actually scares me.
Yeah.
It still does, more than ever before.
So you started to talk to them, or you started to listen to them, or what happened?
Well, there were a bunch of different things that would happen. If you signed that you were an outsider, Usually I'd show up on a board. I'd watch the lingo and
Like a Reddit message board?
A Reddit message board. And back then there were a bunch of other ones. I don't remember where they were.
Yeah.
They were like ones that were just about flat earth,
Yeah.
or they were a little corner of some system that was about that.
Yeah.
You sort of have to listen to the modes of discourse and listen to the vocabularies that people use.
Yeah.
And if you could talk to them in ways that didn't set them off to thinking of you as being an outsider.
Right. Signal that you're a flat earther too, or something.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say that per se, but I'd ask questions and I would just not trigger them and set off the alarms.
Right.
And a lot of the answers when I would get in and just sort of engage with people as if I was a person who was open and they could tell me what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And they would say,
well, but weren't you a person who was open in the sense that you did want to know what they were thinking?
I did want to know what they were thinking. I didn't expect to be convincible.
That's fine.
But I didn't have to talk about that.
You would be convinced if they presented something good. You just didn't expect them to.
Oh, no, I did.
Then they didn't.
And, well, there was never any evidence.
Right,
and that's that people construct their worldviews in very, very different ways. And a lot of people are not aware at all of why they believe the things that they so vehemently believe.
Right. They're not. But it's important for us as a society to understand how these thought structures get created, because reality formation is based on how human psychology collectively creates reality together. And if we don't investigate this, then we won't understand, first of all, how people go wrong, and second of all, how people create reality, and that we're all not going to have the same reality. So it's important to have a diversity of consensuses within some realm of safety, within some realm of, we don't all want to think the same thing. That's dangerous. We don't want the majority of society to believe complete fantasies, because that's dangerous. But we want to have some middle ground where we collectively believe different things that hold society together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There is an intersubjective reality that's very important for holding society together. And even if a lot of it isn't true, sometimes it's valuable.
I came up with the word diversensus, where we have a group of people believing things that are slightly different from each other, but that still creates a cohesion.
Interesting. But yeah, within in that they are not othering each other and turning it all into like becoming enemies.
Not othering each other is a concept of the day.
Yeah, so a lot of what I learned with talking with the flat earthers is that, of course, it isn't that they've seen all the information, but there's a story. Every one of these conspiracy fantasies is more or less the same. It's a story about the believer being special. And you can tie into it all sorts of other, the dark ecstasies of social media, delicious paranoia, the sense that everything around you is much more charged and much less mundane because it's all part of some operation to deceive you instead of just being boringly exactly.
There's something beautiful and alluring about that, in a sense.
There's what did Thomas Pynchon say about? I'll see if I can get it right. In addition to paranoia, there's also anti-paranoia, the sense that nothing is connected to anything and nothing means anything, and it's a condition that, like most of us, can't really stand for very long.
That's not nice.
Yeah. So,
but I love how you're trying to hack reality, both by making musical pendulums and by creating a class to teach people how to make things like musical pendulums, and by going and investigating social phenomenon.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, all of it's emotional is really the short answer, and it's sort of predictable. But once you see the mechanisms involved, a lot of people are lonely. There's a lot of people who don't have any IRL friends at all. And it affects their ability to feel empathy for people close and far. And it affects their need to have a community that tells them that they're accepted. And you can have these communities by excluding others. You have an us because there's a big them.
This is what we need to understand about society today. And Kurt Vonnegut said, great, solving cancer, great, but loneliness is the real disease of our time. And, that was even a while ago that he said it. But I think it's important to remember, as we try to not other the world in this day and age, that a lot of incorrect behaviors or destructive behaviors, like drug addiction and like certain types of conspiracies that aren't just playful, or that might, some of which might be true, but conspiracies that are specifically about hatred or or specifically destructive, that those people might not feel connected, and that rather than just saying, hey, those people are bad, well, sure, the behavior might be bad, but how do we reach these people and how do we understand them? Because people are beautiful at some level, all of them are, and reachable at some level.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Well, it seems like we're watching a big implosion of social media at the moment. I don't know if that'll really happen. I don't know that we're ready to replace it with anything yet, but I'm in favor of it.
It seems like we've gone more than 2 hours. It seems like a nice place to finish up.
Excellent.
Unless there's anything else you wanted to tell us about.
Not at all.
Okay.
I've just said everything I know.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
Andy, thank you. How can people find out more about you? Do you have a website, a Twitter handle?
So my website is andycavatorta.com, right here. And if you want to see my current work, my Instagram is usually up to date, and that's at Andy Cavatorta.
Okay, great. And are you selling anything? Just the class, right?
Just the class, and we'll see if I can get enough people together.
People can sign up for your class.
So many people are interested, but it's a big time commitment for me and for them.
So people can sign up for your class next year by contacting you from your website. And if there are any college presidents or benefactors listening, then they can fund you.
That would be more interesting. I'd love to teach this as a master's curriculum in a research institution.
Cool.
Or in an independent study institution for design and architecture.
I'd like to see that happen.
Me too. Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
Hey, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Bye, everybody.
Woof.
Cool. I'm getting cold.
I'm getting cold too.